At this moment, almost no one in this world could detect his presence. Jian Wushuang, who was continuously sinking, noticed that the deeper he went, the larger the space below became. After descending several hundred feet, the water temperature also began to rise. He cautiously used his thought power to probe the direction of that peculiar aura. Once he pinpointed the exact location, he began to quietly move towards it. The closer he got to the source of the aura, the faster his heart began to beat. An unsettled heart? Ever since he had entered this world, his physical body was gone, and his soul had been reduced to the level of a mortal. However, his state of mind remained untouched. Yet now, something in that direction was disturbing his inner peace. This was beyond his expectations. What could be hidden there that can affect my state of mind? Could it be something beyond the level of a universe god? This thought quickly flashed through his mind, but he dismissed it immediately. It was simply impossible. He then considered that his current physical body, formed from spatial crystals, might be particularly sensitive to space, which could explain why his heartbeat was so rapid, causing his state of mind to become slightly unstable. Without dwelling on it further, he calmed his heartbeat and swiftly moved towards the location. The reason he had been so cautious earlier wasn't that he feared the opponent's strength surpassing his own, but rather that he was concerned that being discovered by the opponent might have adverse effects. It would be troublesome if his plans were ruined. After swimming for the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, a cave mansion appeared in the depths of the dark water. The entrance to the cave was small, barely wide enough for two people to enter side by side. This time, Jian Wushuang was exceptionally cautious. He disassembled his physical body, just as he had done when he emerged from the 9-prison pagoda, transforming into a stream of water that seeped into the cave mansion, clinging to the cave walls. This way, even with the naked eye, it would be difficult for anyone to detect his presence. Once inside the cave mansion, he realized that its internal structure resembled that of a well. The deeper he went, the larger the space became. Almost there, Jian Wushuang's eyes gleamed with excitement. He could even hear the breathing of the person inside, though he had not yet seen them. However, he quickly discerned that there were 3 distinct auras within the cave mansion. Or rather, 3.5. One person was barely alive, with only a trace of breath remaining. Among the 3, there was one he was very familiar with. It was this aura that had led him to this place. Immortal Zhou Chun. After reaching the depths of the cave mansion, Jian Wushuang finally saw the person clearly. As he had sensed, it was indeed Immortal Zhou Chun, the original owner of the 9-prison pagoda. He had thought that Immortal Zhou Chun might have perished, but unexpectedly, he was still alive and had orchestrated such a grand scheme. Not only had he slaughtered all the golden core stage cultivators of the 3 major forces, but he had also created a being like the Ghost Emperor. And there was also the Soul Ascension array. This made Jian Wushuang view Immortal Zhou Chun in a new light. He had once thought of him as a frog at the bottom of a well, but now it seemed that he truly possessed some remarkable abilities. Otherwise, he would never have obtained such a mysterious treasure as the 9-prison pagoda. That was a treasure that could drive even the most powerful of great immortals mad. And now, even though he had not unlocked the first layer, the world within the first layer alone could rival a medium-sized world. It was far from an ordinary treasure. Some of the most heaven-defying treasures in the universe could nurture cosmic secret realms. While the space within the first layer of the 9-prison pagoda was vast, it was still a far cry from a cosmic secret realm. However, with 8 more layers remaining, he couldn't make a definitive conclusion yet. If his true self were here, he could forcibly unlock it and fully understand the true power of the 9-prison pagoda. He moved along the wall, carefully observing the 3 people inside the cave and the woman in white lying on the stone bed. The old man with white hair was Immortal Zhou Chun. Although his physical body had changed, his aura remained the same as before. There was also a middle-aged man in a black robe, who should be none other than Emperor Li Miao of the Tang dynasty. His strength was only at the mid-stage of the nascent soul. However, it was Immortal Zhou Chun's power that startled him. He had reached the pinnacle of the divine aspect realm, comparable to the Xianxia within the city. No wonder he was able to plot so deeply. He must have some method of control, which is why he wasn't worried about the ghost emperor outside. Aside from these two whose identities had been revealed, there was also a stern-faced middle-aged woman. He had neither seen nor heard of her before, but her strength was extraordinary, already at the mid-stage of the divine aspect realm. Next, he cautiously used thought power to probe the woman in white on the stone bed. There was no need to ask. This was undoubtedly the Empress E. Her body still harbored a wisp of soul energy. This was not surprising. He had previously calculated that she must have used a secret method to preserve thought power, and now it seemed she had stored it in the Empress's body, keeping this wisp of soul energy intact. This physical body? When he used thought power to examine her body, his expression changed slightly. Because within this body, there was a hidden, powerful force of all things, and the source was a force of life. He was all too familiar with this aura. In the past, he first mastered the great way of all things and eventually elevated it to the way of life, hoping to use it to break through and become a universe master. However, he later found that this path seemed unsuitable for him and instead focused on the sword way, creating the 9 swords. Even now, he could only unleash the first 6 swords, but one of them was named after life itself. It was clear that his mastery of the power of life was second only to the god of life. This force of life is not innate. It was definitely injected by a powerful being capable of refining life force. But in this world, the strongest beings are only at the divine aspect realm. How could anyone here condense life force? Jian Wushuang was puzzled. If he were to suggest that beings who transcended the heavenly Tao, such as ancestors or great immortals, had descended here, it didn't seem plausible. After all, the Empress had only been attacked 3 years ago, and during these 3 years, there had been no reports of any superpowerful beings appearing. Even the divine aspect realm was considered extinct at first. Wait! Jian Wushuang's mind suddenly stirred as he thought of the Wanlu totem behind Xianxia. Her mother, Xianxia, must have mastered a divine ability that allowed her to condense life force. If that was the case, then everything made sense. The reason the Empress didn't die back then was because of Xianxia. Moreover, that force of life was very similar to the life force of the Wanlu divine tree. In the past, Dan Bao had saved him many times using the life force of the Wood Wei. As for the life force Jian Wushuang himself had mastered, it was the counterpart to death, pure life force. But such life force could only be controlled by the true god of life in the starry sky. That was a deity that transcended time and space, a starry sky deity. To reach that position, he would have to first kill the deity and then inherit their power. But since even Miexing couldn't accomplish that, it was naturally beyond his reach as well. Therefore, Miexing had sought to devour the 4 starry sky gods of life. If he succeeded in gathering pure life force, he would become the god of reincarnation, bypassing the starry sky's true god of life. The more one saw, the more directions one could analyze. This was the terrifying power of experience, a rare form of wisdom. At least now, Jian Wushuang had clearly understood the hidden truth behind it all. Xianxia had indeed appeared in the Great Tang Dynasty and had even saved this imperial consort. That was just 3 years ago. He had been in this world for almost a year now. Calculating the time, the more he thought about it, the more he wondered if Xianxia's disappearance was related to his arrival. Perhaps it was possible, but it was merely speculation. While he was lost in thought, the 3 people inside the cave started arguing. At this moment, Jian Wushuang pricked up his ears. No way! Absolutely not! A double denial. It came from Immortal Zhou Chun and Emperor Li Miao of the Tang Dynasty. These 2 were clearly on the same side. The middle-aged woman, however, raised her eyebrows and glared at Li Miao, shouting, "Do you intend to destroy your ancestors? Stop using the ancestors to pressure me. Everything I'm doing now is enough to make the ancestors tear me apart." Li Miao was not willing to back down either. When he considered the things he had done, not just the ancestors but even the relatives in Tian City wished to kill him. They simply lacked the strength to do so, which was why they let him go. Otherwise, Wei Jiuxian wouldn't have let him go either. However, The old ancestor of Baoguang Temple had never troubled him over this matter. This was originally what he feared the most, but with the immortal master around, he no longer feared it. Yet, unexpectedly, that old ancestor hadn't made things difficult for him at all. He had even instructed the guardian to help preserve the imperial consort's body. But now, the guardian wanted to take the life force from the imperial consort's body and use it to resurrect the princess from back then. She was a witness to the glory of the great Tang dynasty, and the entire dynasty had changed because of her. It was also because of her that the great Tang dynasty attracted its first imperial son-in-law, which led to the flourishing age of the great Tang. No wonder the old ancestor of Baoguang Temple was so kind. It turns out he had his eyes on this life force. Little girl, I advise you to give up this idea. Seeing that you've guarded this body for so many years, this old man can help you ascend. Immortal Jiuchun sounded quite polite at this moment. It wasn't out of kindness. He was just worried that the old ancestor of Baoguang Temple had left some tricks for the guardian. Now that the grand plan was nearing completion, he didn't want any mishaps at this critical juncture. Because this place was extremely important, and any accident would render all previous efforts futile. However, the guardian seemed determined to take that life force, as if she had swallowed an iron weight. The three of them argued endlessly, and tension gradually filled the air. Li Miao, you will regret this decision, the guardian sneered, saying no more. Her words were full of threats, which made both Immortal Jiuchun and Li Miao very displeased. But they didn't dare to act rashly at such a crucial moment. They could only grit their teeth and endure. Agree to her terms, but first, revive the imperial consort. After you take the essence from her body, there should still be some life force left. Reviving a mere mortal should be possible. Immortal Jiuchun secretly sent a message to Li Miao, choosing not to confront her directly. Li Miao, upon hearing this, could only nod in agreement. After softening his tone, he said to the guardian, I won't give you all the life force, but I promise to revive the princess. Will that suffice? But the princess must be revived first. The guardian's tone remained firm. This time, even Immortal Jiuchun couldn't hold back. He angrily shouted, Don't push your luck. Don't think that just because you have some cards up your sleeve, you can test my patience. As he spoke, he unleashed the full pressure of his divine form at its peak, intending to make the guardian submit. But to his surprise, the guardian remained unaffected and even sneered, Old fool, don't think I don't know your secrets. You're not even human. Don't bother trying those petty tricks with me. The trump cards the old ancestor left me are more than enough to kill both of you. The old ancestor instructed me not to act unless absolutely necessary. Do you really think I fear you? Not human. Upon hearing these words, Jian Wushuang was stunned. Could it be that Immortal Jiuchun wasn't human? This was something he had never anticipated. Reflecting on how the other party had been slain before reappearing, and now wielding such immense power, it made sense. But if he wasn't human, what could he be? Initially, Jian Wushuang had guessed that the other party was an ancient cultivator who had simply remained in the mortal world. But to think that he wasn't of the human race? Yet he possessed a human soul. At this moment, the debate had not ceased. You! Li Miao's face turned ashen, but he managed to suppress his anger. He then turned to Immortal Jiuchun and directly asked, Immortal, is there a compromise? Sigh. Immortal Jiuchun let out a long sigh, frowning as he said, Li Miao, Ascension doesn't necessarily require shattering the void. Do you understand what I mean? These words indicated that the immortal might abandon him. The life force within the Empress's body had to be kept intact for her resurrection. Only after she was revived could a portion of it be extracted. But before that, it couldn't be tampered with. If even a trace was removed, the remaining life force would instantly dissipate. Now, it seemed necessary to give up the Empress and his future. Jian Wushuang, who had been eavesdropping, also grasped their intentions. He couldn't help but feel a pang of regret in his heart. What a waste! That's life force, a priceless treasure that can enhance one's life genes. Yet they're thinking of reviving the Empress and then extracting that bit of essence from her. It's like dropping a watermelon to pick up a sesame seed. Jian Wushuang really wanted to jump out and explain the uniqueness of life force to them, but unfortunately, this was not the right moment. Otherwise, he would have been slapped twice by the other party. Inside the cave, a brief silence fell. The guardian still held his head high, a vague sense of transcendence between his brows. Immortal Zhou Chun, on the other hand, had his head lowered, appearing harmless. Li Miao, who had suffered a blow, clenched his fists, and with his eyes slightly closed, he reminisced about his time with the Empress and the beautiful moments they had shared. Tears welled up and fell from the corners of his eyes. This was his final act of tenderness for her. "All right," he uttered just one word, then took a deep breath and continued. "The shackles on the Empress have already been unlocked. You can extract that power now." A light flickered over the Empress's body as the seal was lifted. If it weren't for this seal, the Guardian would have long since taken the life force. "Humph, at least you have some conscience. Once the princess is revived, you can continue to reign as the emperor of the Tang dynasty." After the Guardian spoke, the ring on his finger glowed briefly, and a green stone coffin appeared out of thin air. Inside lay the princess of the early Tang dynasty. Though she was Li Miao's ancestor, he felt no excitement. Immortal Zhou Chun, standing silently on the side, had a changed look in his eyes as he gazed at Li Miao. The Guardian first probed the life force within the Empress's body before opening the stone coffin. The lid was lifted, revealing a face of unparalleled beauty. It was a countenance that could unsettle anyone's mind at first glance. Even Jian Wushuang couldn't help but be astonished. This peerless face could easily rank among the top 100 he had seen in his life. One had to understand that the people he had met were more numerous than the meals these people had eaten. To be ranked within the top 100 in his eyes was an honor that the entire Crimson Eye realm should be proud of. If this princess were to be revived, offering incense and kowtowing to him in the future would be only fitting, because he was the great universe god. But before he could avert his gaze from that face, a streak of black light suddenly shot out. The black light, sharp as a blade, pierced straight into the Guardian's chest. The black mist seeping from above instantly corroded both the Guardian's soul and body, leaving no time for him to muster his thought power. As a result, he couldn't make a counter move. "Immortal Zhou Chun, you..." Li Miao was also startled. There had been no prior signs, and he had already resigned himself to the worst. He was willing to abandon the imperial consort and not affect the grand plan. He was even prepared to give up his own chance to shatter the void and ascend. Yet, at this critical moment, Immortal Zhou Chun unexpectedly killed the Guardian, without giving any hint beforehand. "Stop standing there in a daze. Quickly gather up your ancestor, and let's get down to business." Immortal Zhou Chun retracted the black light blade and let out a sigh of relief. He had only been 70% confident in that move. If he had failed, it would have risked ruining the entire plan. But this was a risk he was willing to take, and he had no regrets. Li Miao retrieved the stone coffin and turned to look at Immortal Zhou Chun. His eyes slightly reddened. Hey, don't say anything. We're just partners. Don't overthink it. I only want you to become stronger, so you don't drag me down in the future." Immortal Zhou Chun waved his hand dismissively, showing no concern. Even with a heart of stone, Li Miao silently accepted this great favor at that moment. The reason he always called the other party Immortal Master was because, to him, the other was no different from his own master. He just hadn't formally become his disciple, and since the other claimed to be Immortal Zhou Chun, he had continued to address him as Immortal Master. At this moment, the bond between master and disciple transcended everything. With just a glance, the two began their plan to resurrect the imperial consort. The first step was to bring Chun Yuan over, and Li Miao immediately took out a token to issue the command. Bringing a mortal over naturally didn't require his personal involvement. But what he didn't know was that Chun Yuan was no longer in the city but in a castle outside the city. Jian Wushuang, who had witnessed all of this, had already made arrangements to capture Chen Yuan, instructing them to find Wei Zhouxian, so he wasn't worried. However, the relationship between Li Miao and Immortal Zhou Chun made him think there was more to it than met the eye. The bond between master and disciple was deep. This significance wasn't limited to the righteous path. It applied equally to the demonic path. Even for those who pursued the Tao, it was the same. In fact, some masters would willingly sacrifice their lives for their disciples, hoping that they could tread the great path that the masters themselves had never reached. It was akin to the relationship between a father and son. If the father couldn't achieve something, he would hope that his son could. If the son failed, he would be disappointed but wouldn't lose faith. But if the son could fulfill his expectations, or even surpass them, the father would be willing to die contentedly. This was the legacy of Tao seekers. It was extreme. Jian Wushuang neither liked it nor hated it. After observing for so long, he hadn't heard anything about the altar. Now that they intended to resurrect the imperial concubine, it didn't concern him much. However, the life force within the concubine greatly tempted him. His current body was forged within the space realm. Skipping the process of refining his body, once he regained his mastery of space, he could quickly elevate his physical body to a new level. But his life force was lacking. If he could obtain that life force at this moment, he could use it to comprehend the Tao and advance his body to master the Tao of all things ahead of time. This would greatly help him return to his peak. But since he hadn't found the altar yet and hadn't sensed the sealed power, revealing himself now and seizing the life force would only alert the enemy. Moreover, there were external threats like the Ghost Emperor and the demons. Even if he obtained the life force, it would be hard to strengthen himself in a short time. The risk wasn't worth it. Fortunately, after the resurrection of the imperial concubine, that life force wouldn't vanish. He still had a chance to claim it. But reviving the concubine required Chen Yuan, so he had to make a choice now. With a thought, Jian Wushuang sent a message to Xianxia. All that remained was to stay hidden carefully, to observe this human tragedy as a bystander. But those outside weren't so lucky. Outside Mongshan County City, Yang Xiao led Xiangyang and the others to the ancient castle, where they met Wei Jiuxian. Chenzu Saintis also followed, discovering that all the strong members of her tribe had died. She collapsed on the spot. Fortunately, Wei Jiuxian wasn't a petty person. Otherwise, she wouldn't have survived. The others were fine. After all, it wasn't their people who died. When Yang Xiao saw Wei Jiuxian, he immediately knelt on one knee and respectfully reported, "Commander, in the city." He relayed everything he had witnessed. Wei Jiuxian merely nodded indifferently and said, "Stay here for now. There's probably no safer place than this." "Oh!" Xiangyang raised an eyebrow, just about to retort. But when he felt the oppressive force from afar, his expression changed instantly. He was all too familiar with that power. It was the aura of demons. So strong. Before he could marvel, he received a message from Jian Wushuang. The message was simple. Send Chen Yuan into Tian City. Even if someone tried to take Chen Yuan, don't fight back. Xiangyang found this odd. Wouldn't that allow the Tang Emperor to revive the imperial concubine? Could this somehow benefit Jian Wushuang? Though he had his doubts, he still followed Jian Wushuang's instructions. This time, however, he laid out the consequences for Chen Yuan. There was no need to deceive a mortal. Moreover, Chen Yuan had always harbored guilt. When he learned that he was the key to reviving the imperial concubine, he resolutely walked toward Tian City. Wei Jiuxian, of course, knew this and didn't stop Chen Yuan. Instead, he curiously sized up Xiangyang. At the same time, Chen Yuan rushed toward Tian City. A group of black-clad, masked demonic cultivators also headed his way, reducing a lot of trouble by converging on him. But they were still detected by Jin Xian and Fu Qing. However, both were entangled with the Ghost Emperor. They couldn't afford to be careless. Nor did they have the time to deal with these small fry. Several Taoists at the Divine Form realm focused their full attention on besieging the Ghost Emperor. This bought time for the demonic cultivators of Qiang sect. After binding Chen Yuan tightly, they tossed him into the well where Jian Wushuang had entered. A force pulled Chen Yuan into an underground palace. Li Miao watched him calmly and dispelled the restraints with a wave of his hand. He said in a steady voice, "Chen Yuan, you must have known this day would come, right?" "No," Chun Yuan shook his head and replied, "But a senior has enlightened me, so I've come to terms with it." "Oh? Is that the cultivator from the Jiang kingdom?" Immortal Zhu Chun suddenly showed interest. Earlier, when Jian Wushuang had annihilated so many ghost cultivators in one move, Zhou Chun had already noticed him. However, Jian Wushuang had mysteriously disappeared later on. At the time, Zhou Chun had been busy controlling the grand formation and didn't have the extra energy to pay further attention. Now, upon hearing the mention of him again, he remembered that there was still a troublesome person who had yet to reveal himself. Zhou Chun was quite wary of Jian Wushuang, for two reasons. 1. Jian Wushuang could burn thought power, and 2. His 9-prison pagoda had fallen into Jian Wushuang's hands. "My life is only for resurrecting the Empress. Don't even think about getting anything else out of me." Chun Yuan, in that moment, exhibited the same righteous spirit as he had when he was a scholar. Immortal Zhou Chun sneered, "Do you think you can hide it from me?" With his strength, he could easily perform a soul search. Asking questions was merely a formality. If time weren't pressing, he would have definitely searched Chun Yuan's soul. But right now, there was no need to waste time. Advancing the plan was of utmost importance. Even if that troublesome cultivator from the Jiang kingdom posed some difficulties, once the plan succeeded, it wouldn't matter anymore. Li Miao, on the other hand, was quite curious about Zhang Shang. His appearance and aura closely resembled that of the woman who had once saved Empress Yi many years ago. "All right, let's begin," Immortal Zhou Chun urged, then started gathering the spiritual bodies within the formation to begin the resurrection ritual for the Empress. Outside, there was a ghost emperor, and here there was another one. However, this ghost emperor was different from the one outside. This ghost emperor was a simplified version with a much weaker aura, just right for a mortal. "Li Miao, inject the soul body into Yi Ren's body first, and leave the rest to me." Immortal Zhou Chun handed the soul body to Li Miao, then walked towards Chun Yuan. With a sinister smile, he said calmly, "Young man, don't worry. What I need is the karma on your body, not your life." At this, Li Miao also nodded, indicating that he wouldn't take Chun Yuan's life. There was no need to kill the goose that laid the golden eggs. Taking some karma was sufficient. After all, he was a seeker of the Tao, not a madman who killed for pleasure. He wouldn't add unnecessary slaughter. Chun Yuan, however, appeared calm. Even if they intended to take his life, he didn't care. The world worked in mysterious ways. When you were ready to die courageously, your opponent might just spare you one last mercy. Not killing you, but instead taking away your final value, leaving you to face a woman full of guilt. The main reason Chun Yuan wasn't afraid of death was because he couldn't face the Empress. The second reason was that he missed Azzi. In this world, there were gods and immortals, as well as vengeful spirits and fierce ghosts. Perhaps, if he died, he would be able to see Azzi again. But now he couldn't die. Immortal Zhou Chun struck out with a palm. Chun Yuan showed no reaction, but his soul was forced out of his body. As a soul, Chun Yuan felt an odd sensation in his body. Before he could get accustomed to it, Immortal Zhou Chun's claw reached towards his forehead, extracting a strand of golden causality. This was akin to a mundane version of the causality tribulation. Li Miao stepped back. Immortal Zhou Chun held the causality thread and pressed it into the forehead of the imperial consort. The causality thread, soul body, life force, and the remaining wisp of the imperial consort's soul began to fuse. Several forces repelled each other but gradually started to merge in Immortal Zhou Chun's hands. Once fully integrated, the imperial consort's consciousness would be restored. That was the major part. The next task was to restore the body. Li Miao was not idle either. The refined blood of cultivators he had collected earlier was intended for the imperial consort's physical body. Not only did he want to revive the imperial consort, but he also wanted her to reach the infant transformation level after revival, matching his own realm. Only then could he use her refined blood to break through to the divine aspect realm. "Silence!" Li Miao called softly. A blood pool gradually manifested in the cave, finally solidifying. Jian Wushuang, witnessing this scene, suddenly narrowed his eyes, his heart filled with shock. No wonder my thought power couldn't detect it. The altar wasn't in this space. He immediately understood where the altar had been summoned from. It should have come from a spatial rift. The altar did not exist in this space, or more specifically, in the Scarlet Eye realm. If he were to search for it, he wouldn't have found it, even if he scoured all of Mongshan County. But how did Qianzu Saintis know about it? This was a point of suspicion. As for why several major powers had descended here, it was likely due to information deliberately leaked by Li Miao and Immortal Jiuchen. In that case, Qianzu Saintis was probably just a pawn, manipulated by Li Miao and Immortal Jiuchen. At this thought, Jian Wushuang felt a chill run down his spine. In an instant, he regained his human form, because he had been exposed. If they could locate the spatial rift and even place the altar within it, then either Immortal Jiuchen or Li Miao must have had profound knowledge of spatial manipulation. No matter how thoroughly he concealed himself, his presence would be detected, even if his thought power covered everything. So he revealed himself immediately. Since the altar had appeared, his goal had been achieved. He desired both the life force and the sealed power within the altar. His sudden appearance did not surprise Li Miao and Immortal Jiuchen. It was as if everything had been calculated in advance. As soon as he emerged, the altar emitted a beam of blood-red light, directly shining upon Jian Wushuang. "Ha ha! We've been waiting for you." Immortal Jiuchen formed a hand seal and roared, "Bloodlight technique, absorb!" Buzz. A powerful force pulled Jian Wushuang towards the altar. Chun Yuan, watching this unfold, was also shocked. He hadn't expected Jian Wushuang to be here, and from the looks of it, Jian Wushuang had clearly been trapped. Thought power, ignite! Jian Wushuang was unwilling to be defeated. He had come prepared and wouldn't be captured so easily. His burning divine power enveloped his entire body as he desperately resisted the bloodlight's pull. He had no intention of becoming nourishment for the altar. However, Immortal Jiuchen sneered at this moment. "Jian Wushuang, do you think your thought power can block everything? You underestimate me, Jiuchen. You won't be able to withstand it. Moreover, the reason I'm called Jiuchen is because I've experienced 9 different worlds and know far more than you can imagine. Don't think that just because you defeated me once, you can do as you please. This time, you'll lose everything, including your powerful soul, which will become nourishment for the altar." Li Miao didn't know much about Jian Wushuang and simply watched him coldly. The overwhelming suction power made it impossible for Jian Wushuang to resist, even though he had pushed his thought power to its limits. Buzz. His body and soul had already begun to separate. This time he was truly done for. If his soul entered the altar, it would be annihilated. He wasn't too concerned about death. Trapped in this world, he had thought about what would happen if his soul was extinguished. Would he return to the realm god continent, or would he reincarnate in this world? If he returned to the realm god continent, then he would immediately return to his true self. That would, of course, be the best outcome. If he entered the reincarnation cycle of this world, then he would reincarnate. But which world he would be reborn in was uncertain. However, doing so would waste his time, and he was unwilling to be outsmarted by mere mortals. The greatest threat he feared was that if his soul were annihilated, it would neither return to the realm god continent nor to the reincarnation of this world. If that happened, his true self would fall into slumber, and he would truly be doomed. Even though the possibility was slim, he dared not take the gamble. Currently, he could not endure the absorption of the blood light. Once he entered the altar, he feared he would have no choice. Therefore, he decided to self-destruct his soul before entering the altar. Don't forget, his soul body within the 9-prison pagoda was considered the true self in this world. However, the 9-prison pagoda originally belonged to Immortal Jiuchen, and he worried that Jiuchen might have tampered with it. Thus, he wanted to destroy his current soul to prevent Jiuchen from gaining any leverage over him. But just as he was about to self-destruct, a burst of blood light flashed, and a guiding force sent him into the altar. Haha! Success! This guy's soul power is much stronger than the refined Ghost Emperor. With him as nourishment, I no longer need that Ghost Emperor. I can finally kill that Xianxia and Fu Qing. Then, I'll refine a body for the Ghost Emperor that surpasses the divine form realm, and he'll have the strength to take revenge. Immortal Zhou Chun was overjoyed, revealing many things in his excitement. Li Miao was also happy, feeling pleased for Immortal Zhou Chun. But before they could celebrate for long, they noticed a change in the Empress's body. Not good. Her life force is fading. We need to revive her immediately, Immortal Zhou Chun exclaimed in shock. What he didn't know was that before Jian Wushuang entered the altar, his thought power had drawn the Empress's life force into his own soul. Such a technique was beyond Zhou Chun's detection. Now, seeing the Empress's life force fading, he assumed it was due to the recent delay. He hurriedly performed a secret revival technique to carry out the final resurrection. Fortunately, the prior fusion was almost complete. Otherwise, if the life force were to fade entirely, there would be no way to reverse it, and the fusion would be impossible. At least for now, he could save half of her life. The remaining half could be restored using the power of the blood-colored altar seal, allowing the Empress to ascend to the same realm as Li Miao. This time, nothing will go wrong. Immortal Zhou Chun wiped the sweat from his forehead, revealing a satisfied smile. He said, I will use the altar's power to restore the Empress's remaining half of her life, while also elevating her to the infant formation stage. As for what comes next, I'll leave it to you. Rest assured, Immortal Master. Li Miao also smiled. Despite the twists in the plan, nothing had hindered its progress. After seeing Chan Yuan's soul and Jian Wushuang's body, Immortal Zhou Chun found them a bit of an eyesore and immediately ordered someone to take them away and seal them under the well. Once everything succeeded, Chun Yuan could live. But when he stepped forward to inspect Jian Wushuang's body, his brows furrowed. How could it be missing? Immortal Zhou Chun was stunned. Li Miao asked with concern, What's wrong? The 9-prison pagoda isn't on him. Immortal Zhou Chun immediately flew into a rage. That was a priceless treasure. He had assumed Jian Wushuang would have stored it within his body. But after searching, it wasn't there. He immediately turned to Chan Yuan's soul, and without waiting for him to speak, he initiated a soul search. After thoroughly investigating everything related to Jian Wushuang, he was even more puzzled. How could this be? The 9-prison pagoda was clearly taken by him. How could it be missing? This touched upon his blind spot. The 9-prison pagoda was a treasure, and with preliminary control, one could manipulate its size at will. If fully mastered, it could fuse with one's body. But this was no ordinary treasure. Even those beyond the ancestral realm couldn't recognize it. Only a true immortal could. Yet, even if recognized, it should have merged with the body. He shouldn't have been unable to find it. In his mind, only one possibility remained. He must have given the 9-prison pagoda to someone else. Immortal Zhou Chun gritted his teeth and said, Forget it. Once we've succeeded, I'll search for it again. After all, no one could truly refine the 9 prisons, so it couldn't escape his grasp. He waved his hand, instructing the Qiang sect cultivators to take Jian Wushuang's body and Chen Yuan's soul away. Then, he sat cross-legged outside the cave, personally guarding the entrance. Mongshan County City. The Ghost Emperor grew stronger as the battle raged on, continuously unleashing his innate secret techniques. His combat power had already surpassed the peak of the divine aspect realm. Xianxia and Fu Qing could barely hold their ground. The other divine aspect realm cultivators could only assist from a distance. As for the nascent soul cultivators, they had long been devoured, leaving not even a trace of their bones behind. Senior brother, the Ghost Emperor's strength is increasing. If this drags on, it won't be good for us. Fu Qing exclaimed, worried. Xianxia felt the same, but with all his cards already played, there was no solution in sight. Damn it! Dealing with one ancient demon was bad enough, but that little emperor had to go and create this monstrosity. Though he was anxious, he wasn't entirely out of options. Wasn't there still another ancient demon outside? The ancient demon that shattered the heavens had been rampaging, draining the blood of the human race to replenish the energy it had lost during years of being sealed. Its combat power far exceeded that of the divine aspect realm by 1,000-fold. Taking on this ghost emperor who hadn't fully matured yet would be more than enough. With a plan in mind, Xianxia suddenly retreated, his gaze locking onto the formation barrier on the city wall. A sinister grin appeared on his face. Boom! The deafening explosion from Mongshan County City instantly alarmed everyone in the ancient castle. Wei Zhouxian furrowed his brows and stood up. He looked directly towards the commotion in the county city, then turned to the sky behind him. A towering divine demon had descended. The great battle was about to begin. The ancient demon versus the ghost emperor. Both sides possessed power that surpassed the peak of the divine aspect realm. This would be a battle for the ages. The glory of ancient times would be reborn in this battle. At this moment, the sky darkened as black clouds covered the faint morning light in the east. A heavy rain was imminent, following a gentle drizzle. But all of this seemed irrelevant to Jian Wushuang. His physical body was sealed at the bottom of a well. It was merely a shell of no use at all. What mattered was the soul. To ensure absolute safety, he had entered the blood-colored altar along with the 9-prison pagoda, wrapping his soul in layers of protection. He had also siphoned the life force from the Empress's body as an additional safeguard. Even so, he had suffered immensely within the blood-colored altar. Upon entering, the devouring force seemed capable of absorbing his entire soul. Fortunately, the 9-prison pagoda's original essence continuously replenished his soul power, making it almost limitless. After all, replenishing a divine aspect peak-level soul with an origin source at the immortal level was relatively easy. If not for the suppression of the heavenly Tao, he could have elevated his soul power beyond the divine aspect realm. But even as a peak-level divine aspect soul, it was enough to sustain itself against the altar's endless absorption. His soul, now transformed into a stream of water, delved deeper into the altar's core. Inside, it was like a new world, though everything around him was shrouded in red mist. This mist flowed rapidly, driven by the devouring force. Jian Wushuang's soul was intertwined within it. It took him an entire hour just to pass through the blood mist region. During that hour, his soul power was greatly depleted. It was equivalent to the soul power of 10 peak stage universe masters. If it had been an ordinary peak stage universe master, their soul would have long been destroyed. Fortunately, Jian Wushuang could continuously replenish his soul power and maintain his peak condition. Additionally, the burning thought power acted as a barrier, allowing him to keep his consciousness clear. He was also able to continually observe the interior of the blood-colored altar. Passing through the blood mist region had consumed 10 times the soul power of a peak stage universe master. Beyond that, there was a blood crystal passageway. Originally, he thought that the devouring force here would be even stronger, but upon entering, he discovered that there was no suction force at all. Instead, the passageway had the miraculous effect of nurturing the soul. However, this benefit wasn't of much use to him. He was merely curious. Wasn't this altar supposed to seal the bloodline of a god and demon? As for the former peak stage universe master, they were likely not sealed but rather refined by this altar. Over 1,000 years ago, it was a prince consort of the Great Tang who sealed the Chenzu Saintess. That same person was also the founder of Baoguang Temple. If it wasn't a seal but a refinement, then everything made sense. At that time, the situation must have been that the altar refined the peak stage universe master, and the so-called seal was a lie. But now, the altar had ended up in the hands of immortal Zhou Chen. Before Jian Wushuang entered the altar, Zhou Chen had mentioned that he had experienced 9 different worlds. Yet, Zhou Chen's realm and strength weren't particularly exceptional. He was merely an ordinary peak stage universe master. What exactly was hidden back then? Jian Wushuang pondered, realizing that this small world concealed far too many secrets. Perhaps those secrets had little to do with him, but he couldn't help but marvel at how such a small world could have been so intricately planned out, with such a complex web of relationships. Maybe the relationship between that great Tang ancestor and Zhou Chen was similar to the current relationship with Li Miao. He didn't know that the great Tang ancestor had already fallen, which made him curious why Zhou Chen chose Li Miao. But these matters had little relevance to him. What he needed to do now was to figure out the function of this altar. Judging from the earlier blood mist, this might not be an altar at all. It resembled more of a small cave world. Typically, such a cave world would be used by cultivators to tame beasts or cultivate herbs. After all, carrying around a portable world was rare, and turning it into an altar seemed somewhat wasteful. Altars like this could easily be made into one-time use items. He wasn't particularly experienced in these matters, but he had seen others use them before. Thus, he was convinced that the purpose of this place wasn't as simple as an altar, and its true function would require further exploration. Jian Wushuang ignited his thought power and began to explore the depths of the passage. Nothing unusual happened along the way. He even touched the walls of the passage formed by the blood-colored crystals with his hand. This was actually infused with the essence blood of gods and demons. What a grand gesture! He was somewhat surprised, as the essence blood of gods and demons was 100 times more powerful than ordinary divine blood. Moreover, it appeared that the essence blood used came from the mental aspect of gods and demons. In this way, just entering this place could nourish the soul. The blood mist outside the passage seemed to be transformed by the power emanating from this place. Inside, it nourished the soul, while outside, it devoured souls. This setup was quite ingenious. Jian Wushuang couldn't help but nod in approval. But back to the main point, what surprised him even more was the level of this god or demon. Comparing it to the so-called ancient demon from the outside world, the owner of this essence blood had a life gene at least 5,000 times stronger than that of ordinary gods and demons. Based on this, his strength could be estimated to reach the level of transcendence, possibly even the level of a Xianxia. If that was the case, then the owner of this altar had a strength that was at least at the level of a great Xianxia. Moreover, looking at the appearance of the altar, it did not seem to be a supreme treasure but rather a supplementary artifact. In terms of value, it certainly couldn't compare to a supreme treasure. Considering that Immortal Zhou Chen even possessed supreme treasures, having this kind of supplementary artifact seemed normal. From this perspective, at his peak, the other party was probably quite formidable. Even if these treasures were all picked up, he would still need the strength to refine some of them. Zhou Chen. Jian Wushuang caressed the blood crystal, muttering to himself. His life level is quite ordinary, and his soul level is also ordinary. He's far inferior to Xianxia or that sword Immortal. Coming from the upper realms, he was naturally not weak at his peak, but compared to transcendence, he still falls short. Not to mention Xianxia. Even so, in the mortal world, his power could far surpass that of ordinary gods. How could Zhou Chen be so weak? This was his greatest doubt. With this doubt in mind, his steps quickened. His thought power continued to cover a distance of 10 miles ahead. Therefore, he wasn't worried about danger. After walking for a short while, he reached the end of the passage. At this moment, he also sensed a faint consciousness at the end of the passage. That consciousness was quite peculiar, devoid of any signs of life and lacking the deathly aura that usually accompanied soul bodies. However, it exuded a certain spiritual charm. Jian Wushuang's eyes lit up, and his pace quickened. This aura felt familiar, reminding him of the true spirit of Qishan Temple. The two auras were quite similar. The difference in strength, however, was like comparing billions of times. Regardless of the disparity in strength, it was at least a conscious spiritual entity. This was incredibly useful to Jian Wushuang, as it might help him unravel the mysteries of this place. Following the aura, he burned his divine power, probing while getting closer. At the end of the passage stood a temple radiating blood-colored power. I've arrived. Jian Wushuang exited the passage and stood in front of the temple. From a distance, the temple was right in front of him, but when he closed his eyes, it seemed to be deep within a nebula. All around him were blood-colored light dots. Interesting. He slightly curled his lips into a smile. There was little he could do about such a small trick right now. But the spiritual entity was right in front of him, and he could only start with it. With a thought, he pointed his finger, sending out a strand of green energy. It was the life force he had obtained from the Empress. What he needed wasn't the life force itself but the various principles contained within it. While in the passage, he had comprehended several principles from it, then transmitted them to his main body within the nine-prison pagoda, allowing him to grasp the embryonic form of all things. In this way, the soul of his main body within the nine-prison pagoda could extract the internal power of the pagoda to reshape a physical body of all things. The more power of all things he absorbed, the stronger the physical body would become. Once the body reached the level of 10,000 times, it would be at the level of Xianxia. At that time, his soul would enter the body of all things, allowing him to leave the nine-prison pagoda. This saved him a lot of time, directly returning to the level of an undying Xianxia. That is, Xianxia. The road ahead would then become much easier. Following the path he had walked before would be enough. First, he would start with transforming the universe from all things, then step into the realm of Dian Immortal, mastering the ultimate swordsmanship, becoming the ultimate Tao monarch, and then merging with the Tao. With the countless experiences of Jian Wushuang, it would take him only a few hundred years to reach the peak of the emperor level. By that time, he would have almost cultivated the power of life from all things, and with that, he could push forward, evolve the universe of life, and with Sword Tao as his core, open up the universe and become a universe master. Tribulations would be as easy as drinking water. Breaking through all the way to the 9th tribulation would be no problem. At that moment, it seemed that everything had become simple. Jian Wushuang suddenly shook his head, a sharp glint flashing in his eyes. He had only channeled a wisp of life force into that spiritual sense, yet he had directly envisioned his own future. And it seemed so effortless. But this was not what he wanted. Not to mention whether the path ahead would go smoothly. Even if he reached the level of Universe Master, the tribulations that followed would not be that simple. His tribulations were not ordinary cosmic tribulations. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so powerful. There was also his soul's thought power, which had become so formidable only because he had devoured the realm beast Morosa. Moreover, in the outside world, he had the augmentation of the beast god weapon, and the Wanjia sword which contained his Tao had been nurtured for countless years, allowing him to unleash the sixth sword move. His true body in the outside world had already reached the peak of 9-star universe god. He possessed countless fortunes. Just the eternal ancient transformation alone could trap countless people. Eternal ancient transformation was something he had created based on the ancient transformation. It required mastery of the Tao of transformation, which he probably couldn't grasp in this world. Furthermore, entering this world might have been for the purpose of undergoing the universe god tribulation in the first place. How could he still walk the old path? But within this world, he didn't even know if there was a suitable Tao for him. Sword Tao as the core. That was the foundation, but relying solely on swordsmanship would be too limited. A mortal could wander the world with a sword, and a cultivator could resolve grudges with a single stroke. But beyond that, transcending, becoming immortal, merging with the Tao, opening up a universe, these could not be achieved by swordsmanship alone. Many auxiliary Taos were also needed. Will this world have them? No! Jian Wushuang's gaze instantly became resolute, and his state of mind returned to calm. The path I want to walk is unique, unrelated to the world I am in. Every universe god is a being who breaks the supreme law rules, and should not be bound by the Taos under those supreme law rules. At that moment, he seemed to understand everything. He also realized the significance of entering this world. Walking his own path had nothing to do with the world he was in. Simply put, it was like the life of an ordinary mortal family. In the Crimson Eye realm, the children of noble families grew up without worries, mastering various ways to make a fortune upon reaching adulthood. However, the children of poor families, when they became adults, might face a dark reality, feeling the unfairness of the world and realizing that not everyone is treated the same. But even from humble origins, great individuals could emerge. Chun Yuan was one such person. Although he didn't achieve fame through examinations, he made the right choices at the right time and soared to new heights. If it had been someone else, perhaps they wouldn't have succeeded. Was this due to the environment? No. It was because of his choices. Now, Jian Wushuang had the right to make his own choices. He could choose to follow the old path, which might not lead him to the peak, but leaving this world wouldn't be difficult. But what would happen after he left this world? Would he return to being the Jian Wushuang with the combat power of a ninth tribulation universe god? Was this the purpose of his coming to the tomb of the gods? Leaving Huiqing and the others behind, he came here to undergo the divine tribulation, didn't he? Back when he left the northern starry sky and arrived at the realm god continent, after facing numerous challenges, even Wuxia had undergone the divine tribulation. How could he lag behind? Moreover, his goal had never been to reach the peak of the realm god continent. It was to step into the starry sky. That was the destination, but not the ultimate destination. At this moment, his mind was as sharp as a sword. He was not influenced in the slightest. He also realized that the force that had just disturbed his thoughts likely came from that temple. A temple that can affect my state of mind? Interesting. He casually dispelled that spiritual force but did not rush into the temple. For now, entering was not possible anyway. Although it appeared close, it was actually still far away. As life force entered the wisp of spiritual consciousness, it quickly stimulated the other party's spiritual power. Whoosh! The illusory spirit began to take shape, and a familiar face appeared before him. Immortal Zhou Chan. Jian Wushuang was startled, and the other party was also taken aback. They stared at each other for a while before simultaneously asking, "How do you know me? What are you doing here?" "You go first." Their synchronization was impeccable. But then they reached an impasse. However, Jian Wushuang wasn't in a hurry, while the other party was growing impatient. From his tone, it was clear that he had been dormant for who knew how many years. Now, seeing a half-living person who recognized his identity filled his heart with joy. He was eager to know what had happened outside. This made Jian Wushuang realize that although this person looked exactly like Zhou Chun, his identity might not be the same. There were more deductions and guesses, but those needed to be clarified by the other party. "I've met someone exactly like you in the outside world, but he wasn't a spirit. He had a physical body." Jian Wushuang answered the question directly, without holding back. The spiritual Zhou Chen's excitement surged instantly, becoming somewhat frenzied as he muttered to himself, "He actually succeeded? He really succeeded." Although Jian Wushuang didn't know exactly what the other party was referring to, he could make an educated guess. No wonder Zhou Chun had such a high level of cultivation, vast knowledge, and even the ability to initially control a treasure like the 9-prison pagoda. It turns out he wasn't human after all. This was entirely literal. If Jian Wushuang guessed correctly, Zhou Chun and this spirit were likely one and the same. Perhaps he was a formation spirit or the spirit of a treasure. This also explained why the other party was so powerful yet so seemingly ordinary. So at this moment, Jian Wushuang concocted another lie. "Are you the one my original self sent here?" Zhou Chen's spirit asked in surprise. Could it be that he rebuilt the heavenly fire realm? This question made Jian Wushuang sweat a bit because it wasn't within his calculations. The ancient realm isn't that easy to rebuild. Outside, Immortal Zhou Chun established the Crimson Eye realm. He continued to bluff. "I inherited Immortal Zhou Chen's legacy and came here, never expecting you to be Immortal Zhou Chen's incarnation." Upon hearing that he was an incarnation, Zhou Chen's spirit roared angrily. "What do you know? I am the original. That guy is just a fragment of my consciousness that split off. I can't believe he gambled right and became an immortal." His eyes widened in rage. Jian Wushuang didn't expect the other party to be so easily deceived. Fortunately, he had respectfully called him Immortal Zhou Chun, which allowed the other party to realize that Jian Wushuang belonged to Zhou Chen's side. Impossible! Immortal Zhou Chun has already transcended existence. And yet you, with your mere spiritual body, dare to impersonate him. Jian Wushuang spoke with a tone of feigned anger, as if deeply loyal to Immortal Zhou Chun. This only made the real Zhou Chun even more furious. He clutched his head and roared, "No! I am the real one. He is just a fragment of my consciousness. He could never surpass me. But you're very weak right now." Jian Wushuang raised an eyebrow, intentionally provoking him. This statement dealt a heavy blow to Zhou Chen's fragile consciousness, nearly causing him to fall into slumber. Fortunately, with the life force he possessed, Jian Wushuang was able to use his soul power to help nourish Zhou Chen's spiritual awareness, preventing him from slipping into unconsciousness. The awakened Zhou Chen finally noticed the strength of Jian Wushuang's soul and exclaimed in surprise, "You mentioned earlier that you arrived here through the blood mist?" Jian Wushuang lifted his head proudly and replied calmly, "That's right. I came here to receive the inheritance." As he spoke, he glanced at the distant temple. That grand hall undoubtedly contained the inheritance. Zhou Chen must have been the true spirit of this inheritance hall. However, this spirit had grown restless and wanted to break free from the temple to become a cultivator. From Zhou Chen's earlier words, it was clear that this was indeed the case. Upon hearing that Jian Wushuang had passed through the blood mist, Zhou Chen's face lit up with joy, as if he had completely forgotten about the mockery from just moments ago. "You actually made it through the blood mist. It seems that even if my clone failed to rebuild the heavenly fire domain, it still managed to establish a remarkable power." Zhou Chen's excitement grew palpable. Jian Wushuang narrowed his eyes as he observed Zhou Chen, wondering what the spirit was plotting. Why did he get so excited upon hearing about the blood mist? The blood mist outside didn't seem all that powerful. As long as one's soul power reached about 10 times the normal level, it was barely passable. Reaching 10 times the soul power wasn't that difficult, right? At least, before transcending, increasing one's soul power was quite simple. However, after transcending, it became extremely difficult to enhance soul power, especially after becoming immortal. Raising soul power would be as hard as ascending to the heavens. This was why soul cultivation methods were so rare. Few could meet the standards required for practicing such techniques. Hence, they were considered precious and mysterious. But that was a matter for after transcendence or immortality. In the mortal phase, permanently enhancing soul power beyond tenfold was relatively easy. Jian Wushuang had experienced the mortal world and didn't find passing through the blood mist to be particularly remarkable. After all, Zhou Chen's original world was the ancient domain, far larger than the Crimson Eye realm. Encountering geniuses with tenfold soul power wasn't uncommon. So why was he so shocked? While Jian Wushuang pondered this, Zhou Chen suddenly spoke with excitement. "Kid, being able to pass through the blood mist means your thought power has exceeded tenfold. And walking the path to heaven means your thought power can withstand 100-fold. In the heavenly fire domain of your, such a genius hadn't appeared in tens of thousands of years. Today, I've finally encountered one, and it's thanks to the dumb luck of my clone that you're here. My past decisions weren't wrong after all. Ha ha ha! 100-fold soul power?" Jian Wushuang was stunned. He could hardly believe it and instinctively turned to look at the passageway behind him. How could there be 100-fold soul power? At first, he spoke earnestly, but as he continued, he suddenly realized the truth. He had been burning his soul power all along, and unknowingly, it had already reached 100-fold. He simply hadn't noticed, which was why passing through the blood-colored passage seemed so effortless. Immortal Zhou Chen's true form had been slow to react, previously caught up in his own words, which had inadvertently led to confusion. Now, as clarity returned, he finally spoke about this matter. 100-fold soul power? That's quite challenging. Jian Wushuang thought to himself. If it were 10-fold soul power, that would be within the realm of normality. However, 100-fold soul power required an innate talent. Innate divine abilities were abilities that came naturally to beings born with them. Innate beings, like ancient demons, also known as divine demons, had life levels that were hundreds or even thousands of times that of ordinary humans. This was considered normal in the eyes of the strong. However, when it came to soul power, everyone was on equal footing. Enhancing one's soul power required diligent effort over time. But upon reaching a certain level, one could create special beings on their own. For example, Jian Wushuang's true form could create special life forms within his own universe, elevating their life levels by tens of thousands of times without issue. Beyond life levels, it was also possible to create beings with unique souls. For instance, a newborn might have a soul level 10 times that of an ordinary being, and by adulthood it could reach 100-fold. This wasn't a problem. Life and soul were different concepts. Life levels could easily reach thousands or even tens of thousands of times higher, but enhancing the soul to such a degree was extraordinarily difficult. If not for devouring a boundary beast, his own mental thought power would never have surpassed that of a universe god. Although he was a universe master, his soul could rival that of a time-space god. He had surpassed 2 entire levels. And it wasn't just any small leap, it was a monumental one. If it were a matter of divine power, that would be relatively simple. As a universe master, achieving a combat power comparable to a time-space god was something he had nearly accomplished. But when it came to soul power, without the encounters he had within the Realm King's divine realm, no matter how much effort or genius he put into it, he wouldn't have been able to reach this level. Such was the uniqueness of the soul. The world within the altar, from the blood mist to the blood-colored passage, all tested one's soul. It seemed that the requirements of that temple for the soul were extremely high. His current soul, though still an ordinary soul, could reach 100-fold strength through burning his soul to enhance his thought power. So that's how it is. Jian Wushuang, suddenly understanding, refrained from further provoking Immortal Zhou Chen's true form. He needed to enter the temple. Enhancing his current soul would expedite the recovery of his true soul within the 9-prison pagoda. Inside the 9-prison pagoda, whether or not he had a physical body did not affect breaking through the first level. Therefore, enhancing his soul would help him enter the second level. Developing a peak-level treasure was the fastest way to boost his strength. Moreover, he now understood that re-entering the mundane world to cultivate again meant he had to tread a unique path. He had to abandon everything. He had to shed his arrogance. His previous experiences could be used, but not recklessly. He had to walk the path of cultivation to its true pinnacle. Then let's start with the soul. Jian Wushuang's heart was as firm as a rock. He conversed with this ancient true spirit, who had slumbered for tens of thousands of years, for a full hour. Both of them opened up new worldviews. At that moment, Immortal Zhou Chen's true form had a vision of a small world connected to the ancient domain in his mind. The master of this small world was a fragment of his consciousness, known as Immortal Zhou Chen, who had now reached the level of Yen Immortal. And the young man before him came from a group of geniuses under Immortal Zhou Chen, entering this place to receive the inheritance. Before him, countless other geniuses had entered, but none had left alive. Jian Wushuang was the first to arrive at the temple. There were many details, and Jian Wushuang explained them in great detail, almost convincing himself of their truth. Of course, it was all a lie he had fabricated. Whether the other party believed him or not, he didn't know, but he himself had come to believe it. In his mind, a world also appeared. It was an ancient domain before its destruction. The upper realm had 108 ancient domains. He had heard Chenzu Saintus mention that later, 36 of these ancient domains shattered, forming countless small worlds. The Crimson Eye realm was one of them. Before these 36 ancient domains collapsed, they had also been glorious. The Heavenly Fire domain, where Immortal Zhou Chen resided, was one of them. At that time, the Heavenly Fire domain was the origin source of the Flame Emperor. This origin source was naturally innate. For the acquired to possess an origin source, one had to become an emperor. Although the upper realm was vast, there likely weren't any emperor-level figures. Moreover, from Zhou Chen's description, Jian Wushuang could deduce that the Flame Emperor was a divine demon, a special life form of the fire path, born with divine flames. At that time, besides the Flame Emperor's Flame Dragon Palace, there was another grand palace in the Heavenly Fire domain that was equally renowned. The Divine Fire Palace. It was the grand palace before them. This palace had been arranged by a supreme being within the Divine Eye clan. The first sequence Legacy Hall. The Divine Eye Legacy was divided into 5 major sequences. The first sequence was the strongest. The 5th sequence was the weakest. However, within the Divine Eye clan, strength was not the sole determinant. Some had even cultivated legacies from 2 different sequences, and their power had surpassed those who had only inherited the first sequence. Therefore, the initial legacy one accepted wasn't too important. What mattered was dual cultivation. To merge all 5 sequences into one was a heaven-defying feat, however. Even in the 108 ancient domains back then, those who could merge 2 sequences were as rare as phoenix feathers, and the merging of 3 sequences was merely a legend. Each sequence has 36 types of legacies, and the 5 major sequences have a total of 108 legacies. To merge other sequences, one must first complete all 36 legacies within the initial sequence. This alone has stumped countless cultivators. Zhou Chen's original body shook his head with a bitter smile and said, "Not to mention, just the foundational legacies required for the first sequence. I haven't encountered a single person capable of mastering them in tens of thousands of years." Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and nodded. He had learned about the uniqueness of the Divine Eye legacy. At the same time, he admired this clan greatly, and even more so the strong individual who had created the Divine Eye legacy. He wondered just how powerful that person had been. To create such a heaven-defying legacy, they must have been at least a universe god. "So, you're the true spirit of the Divine Fire Palace? Created by a powerhouse of the Divine Eye clan back then." Zhou Chen nodded and said, "It seems you know quite a lot. At your level, to know this much, you must hold a high position in the Crimson Eye realm. I'm the current Tao child. My master has told me many things." Jian Wushuang lied without even blinking, leaving the other party stunned. This too was a talent, Jian Wushuang thought to himself. You don't even need to say it. If a cultivator like you, with a soul power 100 times stronger than ordinary people, isn't a Tao child, then my clone must be blind. Zhou Chun was in a good mood, but he didn't hold back when cursing his own clone. Jian Wushuang respectfully said, "Senior, since I've arrived here, shouldn't I enter the Divine Fire Palace to receive the legacy?" He had gathered almost all the information he needed. The only thing he was still puzzled about was why the other party wanted to break free from this palace and transform into a cultivator. Perhaps it was due to ambition, or maybe the formation within the temple had malfunctioned, causing the true spirit to lose its restraints. The final reason could be that the master who established the temple had perished. This was the most likely possibility. The formation malfunctioned, and with the restraints gone, the true spirit developed ambition. But how could the first sequence inheritance created by a supreme powerhouse possibly have issues with its formation? Most likely, that existence had already fallen, and the soul imprint on the true spirit had been exhausted, allowing it to break free. The remaining true form was loyal and devoted. The clone that left was the manifestation of that ambition. This revealed the cunning wisdom of Qishan back then. By splitting his consciousness to create the true spirit, the issue of betrayal never existed. Since he himself was the true spirit, how could he betray himself? Even if he fell, there was nothing to fear. Upon hearing that Jian Wushuang intended to enter the Divine Fire Temple, Immortal Zhou Chen's expression instantly became solemn. "I am the true spirit of the Divine Fire Temple. Originally, I was supposed to personally guide you in receiving the inheritance, but as you know, my spiritual consciousness is currently too weak to lead you inside." So, Zhou Chun sighed before continuing, "However, if you nourish me with your soul power for 300 to 500 years, once my spiritual consciousness has recovered, I will be able to guide you into the Divine Fire Temple. 300 to 500 years. Jian Wushuang frowned. In the past, even if you added a 10,000 after that number, he wouldn't have batted an eye. But now, he didn't have time to nourish someone's soul. Xianxia and Xianxia were waiting for him outside. That ancient demon posed a threat, and Zhou Chen's clone and Li Miao's schemes could lead to Xianxia and Xianxia's demise. He had little hope in Xianxia now. Even if he found Xingluo, the most he could do was gain some understanding of the world from him. As for asking for help, he no longer needed it. His main concern now was Xianxia. She was Xianxia's daughter. There was no need to elaborate on who Xianxia would have a daughter with. When Jian Wushuang saw Hu Qing's Tao image, he understood. This was Hu Qing's bloodline. Whether or not he found Xianxia wasn't important anymore. If he could bring little Xianxia out, Even Hu Qing bowing to him wouldn't be too much. He was more than willing to see Hu Qing happy and forgetting the past. So he couldn't let Xianxia die. Even if it meant not receiving the inheritance, he couldn't let anything happen to Xianxia. Naturally, he couldn't agree to nourish Zhou Chen's true form. With some reluctance, Jian Wushuang asked, "Senior, is it only under your guidance that I can enter the divine fire temple?" "Of course. Without my guidance, entering the temple of inheritance is impossible, unless your strength reaches a level defying the heavens, surpassing the one who created me." Zhou Chen's tone was firm. Forcing entry was possible, but you'd have to be a level stronger than the one who originally created this divine fire temple. This was a widely accepted understanding. For example, the inheritance formation set up by a Dao Lord was nearly impossible to break for someone of the same level, unless they were a heaven-defying Dao Lord like Jian Wushuang back then. If it were an emperor, breaking it would be much easier. "Senior, what level was that Eye of God clan expert who created this inheritance?" Jian Wushuang probed. Zhou Chen squinted his eyes with pride and said, "Your talent is not bad. If you can accept the inheritance of the divine fire temple, you might have a chance to transcend and even become an immortal. However, my master's realm surpasses that of an immortal." "Surpassing Yen Immortal? Could there be realms beyond the Yen Immortal?" Jian Wushuang's tone showed genuine surprise, as if he had just stumbled upon some earth-shattering secret. This made Immortal Zhou Chen even more pleased. After all, it had been tens of thousands of years since he had encountered a worthy successor. Now, having met someone as talented as Jian Wushuang, he was more than willing to boast a bit. Most importantly, he wanted to tempt Jian Wushuang into nurturing his spiritual consciousness. If Jian Wushuang reached the highest level, he could enter the divine fire temple and use its power to fully restore himself. So, without hesitation, he explained, "Of course, there are higher realms. However, becoming an undying immortal is already extremely difficult. Even the Flame Emperor never reached that level. I remember when the divine fire temple entered the heavenly fire realm, there was only one undying immortal across all the ancient domains. I'm not sure if there have been any new breakthroughs since then. With your current level, even if you're a Dao child, I doubt you know much about it, right?" "I don't." Jian Wushuang shook his head in confusion. This time he wasn't lying. He truly didn't know how many undying immortals existed in the higher realms. Nor did he know the limits of cultivation in the numerous ancient domains. Based on the information he currently had, having a Dao master was already impressive. If an emperor appeared, it would be even more extraordinary. Back in the original universe, the worlds were categorized into 3 levels. In lower worlds, it was rare to see emperors. In middle worlds, like the Grand Sea domain, there were plenty of emperors during its golden age. These middle worlds were far superior to lower worlds in countless ways. Higher worlds were even more powerful. A fragmented higher world like the Tongtian Buddha realm could produce dozens of emperors. If complete, it could produce hundreds of emperors. The world of Shang was incredibly powerful, producing ultimate emperors, and even reached the peak of the 5th tier. The 108 ancient domains of the higher realms, even when combined, were not as vast as the lower worlds of the original universe. Unless these ancient domains were separated by vast voids and distances, they might be comparable to lower worlds. However, according to Immortal Zhou Chen, powerful beings from other worlds could still be encountered within the ancient domains. This implied that the higher realms were not limited to just 108 ancient domains. What they currently considered the higher realms could be collectively referred to as the ancient domains. Beyond the ancient domains, there were other worlds. This structure resembled the original universe's divine hierarchy. The ancient domains of the higher realms could be likened to the Grand Sea domain, while the other worlds were akin to the Tongtian Buddha realm or the Great Dream World. If this were the case, the so-called higher realms might actually be an entire universe. Of course, this was just speculation. If it were truly a universe, then there was a possibility of not only having emperors but even a universe master. After pondering for a moment, Immortal Zhou Chen continued, "The realm beyond the undying immortal far surpasses your imagination. They are millions of times stronger than undying immortals. Their abilities are beyond your comprehension. For instance, the 108 ancient domains were created effortlessly by a great being. Their origin source is fragile and can't even compare to the great world where my master resided. Created effortlessly? The 108 ancient domains were man-made. Jian Wushuang exclaimed in shock. Feigning surprise, he managed to gather some information. The 108 ancient domains were not as special as he initially thought, and being man-made wasn't unheard of. That person's power was likely at the emperor level, possibly even at the peak or beyond. Why is that so hard to believe? Those at that level are called great emperors, Immortal Zhou said proudly. But don't confuse these great emperors with the Flame Emperor. The Flame Emperor isn't even worthy of comparison. No matter how powerful the Flame Emperor was, he was merely a transcendent being, not even an undying immortal. A great emperor could kill someone like the Flame Emperor with just a glance. This was true. At its peak, the ancient demon was nearly invincible below the undying level due to its high life form level, making it difficult to kill. Combined with its unique strength and robust vitality, it was practically unbeatable at the same level. However, their bottleneck was also terrifying, as most of them were stuck below immortality. Becoming an immortal was incredibly rare for special beings, and each one of them was a super powerhouse within their level. But compared to the ultimate Tao, there was still a significant gap. Especially for the ultimate emperor, who could fight across levels and even slay emperors. If this were said aloud, even Immortal Zhou might not believe it. After all, the world he had experienced was still quite weak, considered the early stages of a cultivation civilization. Even someone like Shenma could dominate, which showed that the human race had yet to fully demonstrate its advantage in the heavenly Tao. Once humans broke through in the heavenly Tao, they would become even more powerful. The so-called ancient demons would become mere legends, or perhaps even pets raised by strong cultivators. What was once cherished would eventually become commonplace. The ancient domain had not existed for a long time, and it was unclear what those so-called alternate worlds were like. But all this seemed to be still far away from him. Immortal Zhou had laid the groundwork for a while, and finally began to talk about his master. You already know a bit about the strength of emperors, but my master is someone who has surpassed the emperor level. His power is such that he can create worlds with a flick of his hand. In fact, within my master's body, there exists a grand world that is countless times larger than the ancient domain. Immortal Zhou grew more excited as he spoke. Jian Wushuang was genuinely stunned. A world within his body? Wasn't that the origin source universe? A universe master. Immortal Zhou master was a universe master, and not just any universe master, but one who could integrate the universe into his body. At the very least, he must have reached the 7th tribulation level. Of course, to create the first sequence of this inheritance temple, even if he hadn't reached the 8th tribulation, he could still absorb the universe into his body. It was the same when he was in the ancient moon time-space. Seeing Jian Wushuang's astonishment, Immortal Zhou felt quite satisfied. He began to plot in his mind. His plan was to entice Jian Wushuang to nurture his soul. Once he recovered, he could guide Jian Wushuang into the Divine Fire Temple. With his help, Jian Wushuang could accept the inheritance of such an existence. But Jian Wushuang wasn't falling for it. While conversing with Immortal Zhou and extracting useful information, he was also pondering how to enter the Divine Fire Temple. A sequence inheritance created by a universe master was indeed extraordinary. Moreover, this sequence inheritance was not unique. There were many first sequence inheritance temples, and several existed within the ancient domain. Of course, they were all occupied by powerful forces, making it difficult for ordinary people to enter, let alone accept the inheritance. There were even more second sequence temples, and as for the third sequence, they were all dominated by powerful factions. The fourth and fifth sequence inheritances were the ones most commonly accepted. However, entering these inheritance temples also depended on the token one obtained. The weakest was the Black Eye Inheritance Token. There were 5 types of inheritance tokens: black, white, blue, red, and gold. 5 sequences, 5 tokens. As long as one had a token, they could enter the corresponding sequence inheritance. If they didn't have a token, they would be forced to accept the strongest inheritance. That was where the real danger lay. Jian Wushuang wasn't worried. A divine inheritance left behind by a universe master. He had no concerns about whether he could withstand it. His mental state was steady, his soul intact. Everything was in place. Guidance. He smirked slightly. He didn't need it at all. Ignoring immortal Zhou Chen's constant chatter, he sat cross-legged and stopped nurturing Zhou Chen with his soul power. Instead, he fully immersed himself in his own state of mind. Seeing Jian Wushuang's posture, Zhou Chen was momentarily stunned. Is this kid out of his mind? Doubts arose in his heart. But then he sensed Jian Wushuang's thought power approaching the divine fire temple. Such behavior seemed utterly absurd to him. The inheritance token could only be used once inside, and to enter this first sequence of the inheritance hall, Zhou Chen's guidance was necessary. Yet now, Jian Wushuang seemed to be preparing to guide himself inside. Zhou Chen thought he had gone mad. He immediately mocked, "Kid, you're way too arrogant. I already told you. The existence that opened the inheritance hall isn't something you can just—" Before he could finish his sentence, he felt a powerful thought power surge behind him. That thought power continuously grew stronger. In an instant, it broke through the godly form realm, surpassing manifestation, primordial spirit, and great accomplishment, finally stepping into the realm of immortality. Zhou Chen quickly turned his head to look. It was Jian Wushuang. His eyes almost popped out of his head in shock, his voice trembling as he stammered, "You? How did you get here? No. How did your strength suddenly become so powerful?" This development was beyond his expectations. Standing before the divine fire temple, Jian Wushuang clasped his hands behind his back, speaking indifferently. "How I got here doesn't matter. Why I've become so powerful. Naturally, it's because this place is isolated from the heavenly Tao. Without its suppression, I can naturally return to my peak." "What? You said heavenly Tao suppression?" Zhou Chen suddenly realized he had been deceived by Jian Wushuang all along. In the mortal world, suppressed by the heavenly Tao, his split incarnation had never become a true immortal and hadn't opened a small world. Everything had been Jian Wushuang's fabrication. The so-called Tao child wasn't real. Most likely, his split incarnation had already been destroyed by Jian Wushuang, allowing him to enter this place. For a moment, Zhou Chen was left speechless. Jian Wushuang stood there, slightly clenching his fist as powerful thought power swept around him. The long-lost feeling lifted his spirits. Just now, he had reached the divine fire temple with his thought power. He quickly discovered that there was no heavenly Tao suppression here, which made sense. This inheritance hall, created by a universe master, naturally isolated itself from the heavenly Tao. Therefore, his true soul, trapped within the 9-prison pagoda, had been able to emerge. In the mortal world, powerful beings beneath transcendence could only be maintained at the peak of the godly form realm. Even a transcendent soul without a physical body would be suppressed. Thus, he couldn't leave in the outside world. But here, he could fully emerge. With the soul power of an immortal, Jian Wushuang felt revitalized, his mood improving significantly. "Senior Zhou Chen, I'll head in first. If I pass the inheritance, I might consider helping you restore your peak strength, or even help you leave this hall. But on one condition, you must acknowledge me as your master." "You can start thinking it over now," Jian Wushuang teased, then turned and entered the divine fire temple. Left behind, Zhou Chen's face flushed with embarrassment as he recalled his earlier boasts in front of Jian Wushuang. Feeling exposed, his anger flared at the suggestion of submitting to him. Back then, he had split his soul, discarding the part filled with ambition, and refused to leave the divine fire temple. How could he now pledge allegiance to Jian Wushuang? "Humph. Let's see if you can survive first." He snorted coldly and turned his head away. In his mind, even if Jian Wushuang had reached the immortal level, he was still no match for his master. His master was someone beyond the emperor. A mere immortal? Zhou Chen didn't even consider him a threat. Even without Jian Wushuang's nurturing, Zhou Chen believed that with a few thousand years of self-recovery, He could re-enter the divine fire temple and guide everything himself. Fuming, he sat cross-legged before the hall, focusing on restoring his soul power. Jian Wushuang stepped into the divine fire temple and immediately felt a pressure filled with divine power, emanating the essence of fire. From this pressure alone, he could estimate the strength of the one who wielded this fire's divine power. Divine power of fire mastered the ultimate path within the origin source of fire. The divine power should be at a semi-divine level, around 50 million. With just the presence of the pressure, Jian Wushuang could roughly gauge the opponent's strength. However, this pressure seemed to have existed for a long time, and it was merely something left behind casually by the universe master of the Xianxia universe who had opened this place long ago. The true divine power of the original being likely rivaled that of a universe god. But this wasn't much of a surprise, considering that this world might harbor universe gods of 6 stars or higher. What surprised him was how quickly he had encountered a legacy on par with the universe god level. He had been in this world for less than a year, and this place was still considered a mortal world. He couldn't deny that his luck had been extraordinary, stumbling upon such an incredible opportunity. Even after his reconstruction, his fortune remained astonishing. This was the destiny of one chosen by fate. Jian Wushuang continued walking, passing through the long corridor of the main hall and entering the central chamber. There was no divine statue or altar here. The setup was simple, with only a few items like an incense burner and a square table. From the outside, the temple appeared boundless in power, but inside, it was incredibly understated. Below, there were 6 meditation cushions. As Jian Wushuang moved closer to investigate, he realized that a barrier surrounded them. Based on what he had learned from Immortal Jiuchen earlier, these cushions had been left by those who had already received the inheritance within this temple. Though Immortal Jiuchen seemed like someone who had never seen a living person, that was because he had been in slumber for over 10,000 years. Moreover, his consciousness had split into so many parts that he had forgotten his early experiences. The Jiuchen outside was different. Not only had he obtained a treasure like the 9-prison pagoda, but he had also claimed to have traversed 9 worlds, which was why he named himself Jiuchen. Initially, Jian Wushuang had thought these 9 worlds referred to ancient domains, but now it seemed they were great worlds. This made it unsurprising that Jiuchen had set up an array to advance into a fearsome ghost and might have obtained the 9-prison pagoda from the bodies of those who had entered this place before him. One had to remember that even receiving an inheritance carried risks. These risks could lead to one's demise. And when someone perished, their treasures would naturally fall into Jiuchen's hands. According to Jiuchen's true self, the foundation of this inheritance was the soul, and entering the temple would test one's consciousness. The earlier pressure test was merely the beginning. Next, there would be 3 trials to pass, followed by 6 rounds of selection, and 9 secret methods of inheritance. What Jian Wushuang lacked now was time. Given the obstacles, he needed to advance quickly. So, he concealed his soul essence within the 9-prison pagoda once more, leaving behind only his spiritual body, still at the level of a divine being. The inheritance of the Xianxia required very little in terms of cultivation level. Even a cultivator at the Jindan stage could enter. The most crucial aspects were the physical body, strength, and thought power in the first 3 stages. Among these, the most important was the spiritual thought power. Successfully channeling the physical body's strength through thought power to achieve perfection was the key to passing the first 3 stages. Jian Wushuang felt confident. He turned his gaze to the wall on the left front side. There were 3 lamps. The first lamp represented the physical body. With a thought, his consciousness instantly entered the lamp. Inside was a microspace. Before him, various physical forms were arranged. The challenge here was not to use one's own body but rather to master another physical form. In simple terms, this stage tested one's control over a physical body. As long as he chose a form he could control, he could proceed to the next stage. Now, his task was to select a physical form and then master it. If he couldn't control it, he would need to switch to a weaker form. There were 9 physical forms in a row. Jian Wushuang didn't dare to be careless and began testing them one by one, starting from the first. Mastery didn't require claiming ownership. He merely needed to try each form to see which one suited him best. Starting with the first one. Though called a physical form, it was actually a mass of flesh, into which he could project his soul and freely transform it. With a flash, he instantly transformed into his own appearance, with the form's strength determined by his soul power. Thus, this physical form now had the strength of a godly state's peak form. However, its life force was 1,000-fold stronger. It had already reached the level of a special life form. Ordinary human cultivators couldn't control it. Particularly those in the godly state. They would likely be expelled by the oppressive force above as soon as they entered the body. No wonder they had created blood mist and a blood-colored passage outside the temple. Those were set up later. According to what Immortal Jiuqian mentioned, they were originally created in the Sci-Fi domain when Jiuqian still had his own forces. Back then, his ambition was already showing. To prevent weaker beings from bothering him, he created the blood mist world and the blood-colored passage. These were all made from ancient demon blood. Whether it was the blood of that flame emperor, he did not know. However, the temple's master, also a universe master who followed the path of fire, seemed like a coincidence. Jian Wushuang burned his thought power, increasing his soul power 100-fold. Controlling this form, which had a life force 1,000-fold stronger, was effortless for him. In fact, he accidentally burned his thought power too intensely, causing the physical form to warp slightly under the pressure. There was no choice. Without any suppressive force here, he could burn as much thought power as he wished. In an unguarded moment, his thought power surged to around 500-fold. This required a physical form with 5,000-fold life force to withstand such soul power. Jian Wushuang's heart stirred as he immediately left that physical body. Now that there was no more suppression, he could utilize the second layer of the burning secret technique. Burning his soul power once would return 10-fold the soul power. The returned power would then be burned again, and the second stage of burning could yield 100-fold the soul power. For example, if he initially burned 90% of his soul power, it would return with 90-fold the soul power. Upon burning it a second time, his soul power would instantly break through to 900-fold its original strength. And the secret technique for burning thought power had 5 layers. This was just the beginning. Of course, all of this was possible because he continuously replenished his soul with his original body. It also contained the consciousness of a realm beast, which was the most terrifying power of all. The consciousness of a realm beast was equivalent to the consciousness of the starry sky. After all, the starry sky was created by realm beasts. Everything within the starry sky, including all those so-called innate and acquired beings, no matter how powerful, ultimately derived from the materials of the realm beasts themselves. His thought power contained the will of the realm beasts, which was essentially the will of the starry sky. Such a powerful will was not something that could be compared to those special life forms that had been divided into countless layers of existence. Without even attempting the second body, he directly moved on to the third. His soul entered, his appearance transformed, and his thought power ignited. He followed a familiar process, starting to control the physical body. He performed various techniques with his fists, palms, and legs. There was no pressure at all. The life level of this body had reached 9,999-fold. It was just a sliver away from becoming a perfect universe-level special life form. Naturally, he wasn't satisfied with this body. He then attempted the fourth body, a perfect universe-level special life form with a life level of 10,000-fold. This time, everything felt natural and smooth. However, when he saw there were still 5 more bodies remaining, he took a deep breath and suddenly noticed something unusual. The one who crafted this first sequence temple at best matched a universe god. It wasn't surprising that he could obtain a perfect universe-level special life form, or even create one. Beyond the universe level was the space-time level of special life forms. These were special life forms with life genes exceeding 10,000-fold, which were not particularly rare and were easy to acquire. But among the remaining 5 bodies, could there be a starry sky-level special life form? Driven by curiosity, he decided to try the 5th body. This time, he pushed the second layer of the burning thought power secret technique to its extreme. It reached 1,000-fold his soul power. Yet even changing the physical form seemed to be a struggle. The life level of this body has actually reached 30,000-fold. Jian Wushuang endured the oppressive feeling, barely managing to alter his appearance. But his movements had become stiff. He knew he couldn't pass the 3-stage assessment. But he was unwilling to settle for an ordinary universe-level body. He increased the burning of his thought power again. Third layer of burning, extinction, buzz. His thought power instantly soared from 1,000-fold to 5,000-fold. This time, it wasn't that he couldn't control the body, but rather that the body couldn't withstand him. However, his soul was starting to feel strained. Although it was constantly replenishing, it was still only at the divine form level. It seems I need to improve my realm. With a thought, Jian Wushuang created a small opening in the 9-prison pagoda, allowing his soul's original body to return, but keeping his realm at the primordial spirit level. At this level, he had stepped into the realm of laws, similar to when he was a lawmaster in the native world. In the orthodox division of realms, a lawmaster was already at the peak of the primordial spirit level. Once he suppressed his realm to this level, his soul indeed felt much lighter. At the primordial spirit level, one could sever the divine, and divine thought would become incredibly powerful, naturally capable of enduring more burning. He no longer felt satisfied with this body either, and his thought power moved directly to another clone. Right, I can split my soul power to control the other bodies. How would the inheritance assess that? This sudden idea intrigued him. Moreover, all these bodies were spherical fluids, naturally immortal beings. Wouldn't they also be able to merge into one? Because each body was at the extreme level within its own realm. 9 extremes. He suddenly wanted to try the strongest body. The first body, life level of 1,000-fold. The second body, life level of 5,000-fold. The third body, life level of 9,999-fold. The fourth physical body, a life level of 10,000-fold. If we categorized the first 4 physical bodies uniformly, they would fall under the universe-level special life form category. The upper limit of a universe-level physical body was 10,000-fold, and the lower limit was 1 time. For ordinary human cultivators, adulthood represented a life level of 1 time. To increase this required postnatal effort, but no matter how much effort was exerted, raising the life level of the physical body to 10-fold was typically the limit. Further enhancements mainly relied on treasures. For instance, the entire body of a special life form was a treasure. The simplest and most straightforward method was to use the blood of a special life form as a reference, dilute it, and merge it with one's physical body. There were many such methods. For example, in other races, the life genes of the demon race started at around 3 times, and refining demon cores could also increase it. However, there was always a limit to these enhancements. For instance, absorbing a special life form with a level of 1,000 times could elevate one's physical body to 999 times. It was impossible to surpass the original life level. Theoretically, an ordinary human could not achieve a perfect universe-level physical body merely by relying on the special life forms within the universe. Unless they transcended the universe level and absorbed space-time level special life forms, they could not surpass the universe-level physical body. But physical enhancement was ultimately considered a side path. Everything was centered around the divine body and divine power. Back then, his physical body had undergone 10 refinements with the help of the Shanjun at Demon Sound Mountain, perfectly integrating the physical body with the divine body and forging his perfect divine power. That was the key to enhancing combat strength. However, to exceed the limits of combat strength, one had to achieve perfection in everything, even in the so-called side path of physical enhancement. Speaking of space-time level special life forms, the 5th physical body, a life level of 30,000-fold. He split his soul power, directing it towards the 6th and 7th physical bodies. These 2 physical bodies had life levels of 50,000-fold and 80,000-fold, respectively. His soul level had already burned to the 10,000-fold level, so controlling 3 space-time level special life forms at once was not challenging. This was because each of his 3 soul avatars could burn to the 10,000-fold level. In this way, He could control the perfect special life form with a life level of 100,000 times within the spacetime level. The eighth physical body, a life level of 100,000 times. This was the pinnacle of the spacetime level. He had encountered many perfect special life forms at the spacetime level, but he had never studied them closely. Only now did he realize that the perfect special life form at the spacetime level was nothing less than a beast god. A life level of 100,000 times, with an initial divine power of 100,000 times as well. However, he was currently unable to use divine power. That was something he had seen in the Xianxia temple. As for starry sky-level special life forms, he had not encountered any, because he had not yet ventured into the starry sky. At this moment, his gaze fell upon the ninth physical body. 9 physical bodies forming a sphere, representing the 9 layers of the physical body. The final body was a special life form at the starry sky level. How could the creature refining this divine palace possess a body of starry sky level? At most, it should be a universe god. Jian Wushuang couldn't believe it. Moreover, this vast world was merely 1% the size of the realm god continent. He could accept that a perfect life form of the time-space level had been nurtured and picked up by a powerful member of the God Eye clan. But the presence of a special life form of starry sky level was beyond explanation. Unwilling to believe it, he decided to attempt to take control of the ninth body. To be safe, he merged his soul clone into his main soul. His divine power burned to the extreme, and his soul power reached 1,000-fold. With a thought, he guided his soul into the final body. Buzz! The moment his soul tried to enter, a terrifying pressure forced him out. That overwhelming force sent a shiver down his spine. That power is so close to that of a realm beast. It's just like my beast god weapon. Jian Wushuang gasped, steadying his soul. He was all too familiar with that aura. After devouring the consciousness of a realm beast, he had learned much about them, especially since his beast god weapon was embedded with a realm beast's eye. He used that power daily, making it as familiar as his own. Could this starry sky level special life form have reached the level of a realm beast? He shook his head, dismissing the thought. That power had not fully reached the level of a realm beast, perhaps only a fifth of its strength. But even so, it was beyond what his current soul could bear. This body was equivalent to a fifth of a realm beast. One had to know that powerful realm beasts like Morosa were capable of shattering the realm god continent. Even spacetime gods struggled to break the realm god continent. Only those who had reached the starry sky level could achieve that. For example, the star spirits. They were capable of killing realm beasts because their power was extracted from the essence of countless realm beasts, which made them so formidable. After discovering the secrets of the starry sky, Jian Wushuang realized that to progress further in his cultivation, he would have to deal with realm beasts. In his weaker years, he had relied on his beast god weapon to rise in power, later utilizing beast god power combined with the thousand ancient change and the eternal change to create the primeval change, mastering the power of the starry sky ahead of time. The power contained within was purer than spacetime power, far more refined. This was why his strength had become so formidable. Now, if his body could compare to a realm beast, it would be more than just a minor path. It would dramatically enhance his combat power. No matter what, he had to control this body, even if it meant breaking the divine palace to take it with him. Although he didn't know how that God Eye clan member had acquired this starry sky level special life form, he was determined to take it. Even if he couldn't take it now, he would attempt to do so and, upon returning, he would kill the clone of Immortal Jochun, seize the blood altar, and carry this first sequence inheritance palace with him. For now, his goal was to enter this body. The limit for a special life form at the universe level was 1,000-fold soul power, requiring 100-fold to control. For a special life form at the spacetime level, the limit was 10,000-fold, requiring 1,000-fold soul power to control. Thus, a special life form at the starry sky level exceeded the 10,000-fold limit. His soul power would first need to surpass the 1,000-fold mark. But his thought power had already reached the third level. Going further wasn't impossible, but his current level wasn't sufficient. Transcendence, great perfection. Jian Wushuang's soul power instantly soared, and his level elevated to the great perfection. This was the final stage before immortality, equivalent to the peak of the ancestor realm in the native world. Beyond this was the realm of the immortal Yen Immortal. Due to the 9-prison pagoda, his soul had only just reached the level of Yen Immortal. In the upper realms, his power might have surged directly to Tao Lord, though reaching the level of Emperor Lord seemed unlikely. After all, when he entered this world, his clone had only 6-star universe god strength. At that time, he had divided his soul among countless bodies, so each portion was relatively weak. Looking back, he regretted it, but without the determination to split his soul into thousands, he wouldn't have entered this world, nor would he have encountered a special life-form body of the starry sky level in the God Eye Inheritance Palace. Everything had happened for a reason. The origin. Let it begin now. Jian Wushuang burned his soul to the 4th layer. Soul annihilation. Silence. This was the peak level of burning thought power. Any higher, and it would reach the 5th layer of the burning secret technique. Although he currently maintained his realm at the great perfection, burning the 5th layer of the soul secret technique could not be achieved with just the soul at the immortal level. Because the power of burning at the 5th layer was far beyond 100,000-fold or even 1,000,000-fold. Even if he could burn at the great perfection level, he would need his original soul, and it would have to surpass his own realm by 5 levels. Above great perfection, in terms of major realms, the levels were Immortal, Yen Immortal, Great Emperor, Emperor, Universe Master, Universe God, and Spacetime God. This meant that to burn the 5th layer of the secret technique, he needed to use his original soul in the outside world, and it had to be before his soul was divided into thousands of fragments. This was simply too defiant of the natural order, and he was currently incapable of doing so. Fortunately, this special life form at the starry sky level did not require him to burn to the 5th layer. The 4th layer of soul annihilation would be sufficient. This was also the first time he had burned the 4th layer of soul annihilation, as in the outside world, he had never needed to use this level of burning secret technique. Burning the soul and divine power had their limits. Previously, he had the power of life to replenish his divine power, allowing him to freely use the secret technique of burning divine power. Now, with the supplementation of his original soul, he could freely use the secret technique of burning the soul. These prerequisites all required sufficient strength. Burn! He gritted his teeth and roared angrily. The original soul within the 9-prison pagoda was instantly absorbed entirely, while his great perfection clone gained a soul power of up to 180,000-fold. This time it should be enough. He gazed intently at the special life form of the starry sky level. With a thought, his soul rushed once again into the flesh. Buzz! The immense resistance was still there, but it no longer forced him to retreat. This time he went all out, passed through layers of obstacles, and completely entered this body. Power lock, soul lock, body lock. Great perfection. Whoosh! Transform! Jian Wushuang controlled the starry sky level body, and it immediately transformed into his own appearance. However, while controlling the body, the immense pressure it brought made him very uncomfortable. Moreover, in his mind, an endless stream of oppressive forces kept emerging, as if a realm beast was whispering in his ear. This interference continuously assaulted his will. Fortunately, his willpower naturally contained the power of the realm beast. Only then could he control this body. However, the interference and the pressure still prevented him from fully mastering this body. The life level of this body had already surpassed 1,000,000-fold. How is this possible? This isn't a starry sky level special life form. This is practically comparable to the true form of a realm beast. Jian Wushuang gritted his teeth, his very soul beginning to tremble at that moment. The eerie thing was that the life level of this body continued to increase. This brought him even greater pressure. His true soul had already been completely consumed, turning what was once living water into dead water. This is bad. Jian Wushuang's expression changed. He clenched his fists, no longer burning his soul power, but instead used his willpower to suppress this body. Even if this was flesh and blood condensed from a realm beast, he had to suppress the interference and rejection from it. This is definitely a realm beast's body. That infinitely growing power is terrifying, just like Morose's true form back then. he felt a wave of fear in his heart. He vividly remembered the oppressive feeling that came from the realm beast. This was a body that no cultivator's soul power could withstand. The ninth body was far more terrifying than the previous 8 bodies combined. Moreover, the life level grew with the soul. This meant that even if Jian Wushuang burned his soul power 1,000,000-fold, he still couldn't bear this oppressive force. How could something like this exist within the divine fire palace? Jian Wushuang gritted his teeth, deeply puzzled. The body of a realm beast was not just precious. The key point was that in the few disciplined times when realm beasts invaded, very few were actually slain. He knew of only one instance, where a realm beast that could shatter the realm god continent was slain. And this world should have some connection with the star field of the gods. The star field of the gods was formed because of the shattered realm god continent. Thinking along these lines, there was some connection. But that was all. This realm beast's body, even if it had been obtained by that star spirit who slew it back then, could not have ended up in this world, let alone fallen into the hands of a cultivator barely at the level of a universe god. Moreover, this body had been refined into a sphere, likely to suppress the uncontrollable nature of the realm beast's body. The being capable of refining such a body could not possibly be a universe god. At the very least, it would need to be a time-space god or even a starry sky god. He would even believe it if someone said that the star spirit had refined it. No matter, since I've encountered it, this is my destiny, and I must seize it. A thought stirred in his heart, and his soul power began to gradually decrease. After all, he had now entered the realm beast's body. Continuously increasing soul power also raised the life level of the body. It had just surpassed 3,000,000-fold. So, he simply lowered his soul power directly, maintaining it at around 100,000-fold. The life level of the realm beast's body also decreased slightly. But then it rebounded. This time, instead of forcibly suppressing it with soul power, he used his consciousness to wear it down. I refuse to believe I can't outlast a realm beast's body that has been dead for who knows how many years. He immediately sat down cross-legged, putting everything else out of his mind, and began to wear down the realm beast with his consciousness. The wear and tear on his consciousness was the most painful. But the ability to grow stronger meant nothing to Jian Wushuang. Let's see who can outlast the other. He was extremely confident. The two consciousnesses clashed continuously, even leading to mutual devouring. Each side wanted to consume the other, but within Jian Wushuang's willpower lay Morosa's willpower. Morosa's strength was among the top in the entire Void Realm. The original owner of this body might not have been weaker than Morosa, but ultimately, they had already fallen. Now, the only thing left in this body was some residual willpower of the realm beast. This willpower had no consciousness, behaving like a mad demon. Like an old hen protecting her chicks, it would let no one approach. But Jian Wushuang, like a cunning weasel, used the same willpower to slowly devour the opponent. He sat cross-legged for who knows how long, forgetting everything that was happening in the outside world. Fortunately, the Divine Fire Palace and the Scarlet Eye Realm were not in the same dimensional plane, so he didn't know how the flow of time worked. If the time flow was faster than outside, the outside world was basically doomed. If it was slower, then there was still hope. But none of this hindered his desire to grow stronger, to protect Xianxia, to protect Xiangyang, and even to save Chun Yuan's life. These were actions he would only take under the condition of absolute certainty. If it involved someone he cared about, he might take a risk, even to the point of risking his life to save them. However, all of this had a prerequisite. His growth rate could not be compromised. More importantly, this realm beast's body was of immense help to his true self in the outside world. It could very well be the key step to passing his divine tribulation. Because he needed to walk a different path, he had to forget everything else. The two intertwined wills seemed to be vying for control over this body. At times, they attacked each other. At other times, they devoured one another. Jian Wushuang's soul power couldn't suppress the other side, but his willpower remained dominant, continuously eroding the will of the realm beast. He didn't know how long it lasted, but after a prolonged struggle, he finally managed to completely suppress the other side. The realm beast's own will had been driven into a corner, shivering in fear. It worked. He felt a surge of joy in his heart. His will had completely suppressed the will of the realm beast's body, which meant he would no longer be disturbed. The only downside was that he couldn't fully control the body yet, which was part of the test he needed to pass. The purpose of entering the Qixin Temple was to obtain the divine eye inheritance. Yet, in this very first trial, he encountered the realm beast's body. What else awaited him afterward? With this thought in mind, he didn't rush to the second trial. Instead, he fully familiarized himself with this body. Suppressing the will didn't mean it was entirely eradicated. If he encountered danger and his willpower waned, the other side might retaliate. Jian Wushuang didn't want to plant a hidden threat in his own mind. So, after suppressing the other side, he began to fully engage, simultaneously comprehending the life structure of the body while also imprinting his soul. He prepared to completely take over this body. Originally, this was a treasure used to test the inheritor, but now he intended to forcibly take it away. This was much easier than seizing it from the realm beast's will. Once the soul recognized him as its master and the body and soul merged perfectly, who could take this body away? He was slightly concerned. Would his body and willpower become those of the realm beast? And would he be surrounded by star spirits once he left? But then he thought, his soul was still primarily human, and the star spirits were not fools. They would surely be able to tell. He then devoted himself fully to controlling this body. At the same time, he continued to eradicate the last vestiges of resistance in the body's will. As he devoured the other side's willpower, the speed at which he took control also accelerated significantly. The level of life he was comprehending brought him great joy. Because the realm beast's level of life was extremely high, it reached the upper limits of the starry sky. After all, living in the limitless void, no one knew how much a realm beast could grow. Just the life level of this body alone, which Jian Wushuang maintained at about 1,000,000 times, was enough for him to comprehend its life structure. He discovered that the realm beast's body could become formless and colorless, allowing it to maintain the highest absorption state for any gathered power. The most heaven-defying ability, however, was that this body could isolate spacetime. In other words, the realm beast could create its own spacetime. It could devour spacetime, even the starry sky itself. Unfortunately, I was born in the starry sky, Jian Wushuang lamented, shaking his head. He quickly dismissed the thought. If he were to devour the starry sky, wouldn't he be slapped to death? The 12 star spirits were no joke. There were many powerful star gods and spacetime gods within the starry sky. Even at his peak, he was merely a 9th tribulation universe god. He dared not attempt to devour the starry sky. Of course, besides this heaven-defying danger, there were benefits as well. He discovered that the life level of the realm beast could only be suppressed to about 1,000,000-fold at the lowest. Fortunately, the physical body of the realm beast wasn't reliant on soul power, but the threshold to enter the body required soul power. Controlling and manipulating it required immense willpower. This was because the realm beast was a natural-born destroyer. It could destroy everything in existence and was also capable of creating divine beings. The lower limit was 1,000,000 times that of the human race, while the upper limit was infinite. His thought power allowed him to control the body at will. He punched. The punch hit the air, and there was no fluctuation in the life level. But when he used a technique and aimed at the void, the life level instantly soared to 10,000,000 times. This startled Jian Wushuang, who quickly steadied himself. That's terrifying. I can't probe any further. I must first completely take control of this body. That strike just now directly increased the willpower of the realm beast by 10-fold, instantly overpowering his own willpower. Willpower was something that increased with the level of the physical body. However, from this, he also realized that the physical body of the realm beast could freely exhibit levels beyond its limits. This was the biggest surprise. With such a high life level, once he returned, whether he pursued the path of divine power or swordsmanship, it would assist him in reaching the true pinnacle. Once I return and regain my original divine power, and merge it once again with this body, even if I haven't crossed the divine tribulation, I won't fear those space-time gods. He felt an immense surge of confidence at this moment. never imagining that one day his physical body would advance so greatly. Back when he tempered his body in the Magic Sound Mountain, he thought of his body as a bottle. Divine power was the water. That was a self-imposed limitation. The bottle had its limits. Perhaps his physical body could merge with the divine body to break through those limits. But the body born within the starry sky was already restricted. However, the physical body of the realm beast had no such limitations. If expanded upon, the realm beast was a naturally born life form from the void, while the beings of the starry sky were all postnatal life forms. With this body, what I need to break through is not just the cultivation system. He clenched his fist slightly, feeling the power emanating from his body. This newfound confidence made him feel that transcending the starry sky would not be a problem in the future. Both his physical body and soul now had the foundation to transcend. His soul had advanced because he devoured Morosa, and the gains from that were similar to what he gained now. Yet, in the realm god continent, he had a battle power surpassing even his peak. And in this small world of the Crimson Eye realm, he managed to obtain such heaven-defying opportunities. It was unbelievable, almost like a dream, and this was just the first trial. Once he fully mastered the realm beast's physical body and merged his soul and life into one, he would prepare to leave here and seek the second lamp. But just as he was about to leave, a powerful force of restriction suddenly descended. Ha! Jian Wushuang was momentarily stunned, but then began to struggle free. The corners of his mouth curled up in a cold smile as he thought, a small restriction left by a mere universe master, and it wants to restrain me? Despite his current state being maintained at the peak of the Great Ascension, with his formidable willpower and physical strength, this restriction left by a universe master couldn't hold him. With just a slight exertion, he easily broke through the restriction. The first lamp instantly extinguished. The entire hall began to tremble, as if the sky was about to collapse. Zhou Chun, who was guarding outside the hall, suddenly felt his spiritual body beginning to contract. He looked towards the hall in horror and exclaimed, "What's happening? Why is the aura inside the hall fading away?" At that moment, even the blood-colored altar started to collapse and contract. Zhu Chen's avatar, still plotting outside, had not yet noticed. However, the internal contraction had reached its limit. Even the wisp of Zhou Chen's true self inside began to disintegrate due to the contraction of the divine fire hall. Fortunately, it was just a trace of spiritual consciousness, so it wouldn't be completely extinguished. Impossible! What did he do? Zhu Chen's true self was utterly shocked. Even though Jian Wushuang had previously displayed his immortality, it shouldn't have caused such a reaction in the divine fire hall. How could he have known what Jian Wushuang had discovered inside the divine fire hall? Luckily, due to the declining power of the divine fire, Zhou Chun could once again enter the hall and take control. Swish! He rushed into the divine fire hall, only to see Jian Wushuang standing unharmed in his original position. Zhou Chun furiously shouted, "What did you do? Why has the power of the divine fire declined? The energy is collapsing." Zhou Chen's true self was seething with rage. He had given up his freedom to guard this place, and now Jian Wushuang had caused such chaos. How could he not be furious? In this world, there is no eternal existence, only eternal power. Jian Wushuang slowly turned around, his eyes filled with pity. How could a mere Xianxia know much? How could he possibly understand the laws of this world? The divine fire hall had begun to contract and collapse. While Jian Wushuang hadn't expected this outcome, it wasn't entirely surprising. It was because he had taken the body of the realm beast. This body was undoubtedly the most precious thing in the entire Temple of Inheritance. He was only curious as to why the body of the realm beast had ended up here, and even more so about its purpose, which the universe master who created this place clearly knew. For someone to understand the mysterious uses of the realm beast's body and place it here, their identity had to be extraordinary. A universe master in the ninth tribulation realm would never have had the opportunity to encounter a realm beast. Of course, that was unless he excluded himself. But Jian Wushuang didn't think that the other person could compare to him. Back then, It was only because of the Realm King Divine Realm that he learned about the Realm Beast's immense power. But even then, he hadn't obtained its body. Perhaps, by accepting the inheritance here, he would finally understand everything. Once the Divine Fire Hall had stabilized, Jian Wushuang completely ignored Zhou Chen's true self and prepared to enter the second lamp. But Zhou Chen's true self could no longer stand by. He shouted angrily, "If you don't explain yourself today, don't even think about accepting the inheritance." As he spoke, he activated all the restrictions he could control, trying to block Jian Wushuang. For someone who could forcibly merge with the Realm Beast's body and escape the Divine Fire Hall, Jian Wushuang certainly wouldn't care about a mere Xianxia. He hadn't destroyed Zhou Chen out of respect for the creator of this place. After all, he had gained something valuable and saw no need to wreak havoc. However, when it came to what he deserved, he wouldn't hesitate. "Stop!" Suspended in mid-air, Jian Wushuang pointed with a single finger. Using only the power of his physical body, he instantly shattered the restrictions in this space, simultaneously binding the controller of this space tightly within the rules of destruction. Jian Wushuang knew that if immortal Zhou Chen dared to move recklessly again, he would be instantly annihilated by the laws of destruction. Though he held a certain respect for this place, it didn't mean he would allow himself to be controlled by others. He wouldn't go to extremes, but he would see things through to the end. After subduing immortal Zhou Chen's true body, Jian Wushuang ventured into the second lamp, the second trial. Trapped within the laws of destruction, immortal Zhou Chen's true body looked around in terror at the destructive forces surrounding him, unable to move. His heart was filled with dread. When he saw Jian Wushuang entering the second lamp, he was momentarily stunned. He's only just reached the second trial? He had thought that the great commotion caused by the Godfire Temple was because Jian Wushuang had violated the restrictions within the secret arts of the inheritance. But to his surprise, it was due to the destruction of various restrictions within the Godfire Temple across the three lamps. So, everything that just happened was because of the first lamp? He turned his gaze to the mural depicting the heavenly palace, focusing on the lamp within the image. It's gone dark. The lamp has gone dark. Immortal Zhou Chen's heart was initially filled with astonishment, but suddenly, a powerful consciousness surged into his mind. However, due to the surrounding laws of destruction, this consciousness was cautious, not daring to be reckless. But immortal Zhou Chen's consciousness was already weak, and as soon as the powerful consciousness invaded, he fell into a deep sleep. In its place was a new consciousness, one that was gradually weakening, connected to the laws of time. The controlled immortal Zhou Chen raised his head to gaze at the mural of the heavenly palace, unable to calm his heart. "How many years has it been? I've finally waited for you." Within Zhou Chen's eyes, a starry nebula could be seen. Above the nebula, an elderly man sat cross-legged, and in a flash, the image of the realm god continent appeared. The second lamp. This was the place where souls resided. There were 9 in total. This time, instead of trying them one by one, Jian Wushuang went directly to the 9th golden soul. A crack appeared between his eyebrows, and a powerful force of attraction drew the golden soul directly into his sea of consciousness. A strong force of interference pushed him back a step. It appeared to be a soul, but it felt more like a cluster of memories. Sealed memories from, "I've seen this place before." Jian Wushuang's eyes became vacant as he saw a scene of the heavens and earth collapsing within his mind. This is a battlefield, but this place didn't belong to any part of the starry sky. He had seen it before in Morose's consciousness as well. This was the Void Land. In an instant, time and space felt far, far away from him. Yet the mighty warriors on the battlefield seemed very close. He saw a mysterious warrior wearing a mask. The mask looked familiar, but he couldn't recall the name. The masked warrior, with his hands behind his back, fought against 3 opponents alone. His adversaries were not universe beasts, but 3 figures emanating an indescribably powerful aura. The aura was stronger than anything Jian Wushuang had ever encountered, even stronger than the star spirits. It was so overwhelming that he could barely breathe. Even with his universe beast physique, the pressure made his heart race. It was as if he had encountered a natural enemy. This power was immense, enough to shake the heavens and the earth. Yet the mysterious masked warrior could hold off all three, battling them to a standstill. Their fight caused the chaotic streams on the battlefield to flow in reverse. The battle moved from the battlefield to a towering divine mountain, where the aura was so intense that Jian Wushuang shuddered, as if he had been there before. He looked up at the top of the divine mountain, but clouds obscured his view. Returning his gaze to the battle, he saw that the fight had grown more intense. The mysterious masked warrior seemed to be desperately holding them off, while the three overwhelmingly powerful warriors were trying to destroy the divine mountain. The masked warrior was overwhelmed, unable to stop them. In the end, he sacrificed himself to take down two of them. But one top-tier warrior remained, and he began to attack the divine mountain. At that moment, another warrior appeared. This time, Jian Wushuang saw the face clearly. His eyes widened in shock. It was him. Carrying the divine sword on his back, Jian Wushuang wore dark red battle armor, his hair flowing in the wind. Facing a formidable opponent with an overwhelming presence, he silently drew his sword, executing a move he had never seen before. But that sword strike encompassed the entire starry sky. It was one of his Starry Sky 9 swords, though he wasn't sure which one. With just that one strike, the formidable opponent was instantly gravely injured, clutching his chest in an attempt to escape. Yet Jian Wushuang didn't pursue him. He simply stood alone with his sword at the base of the sacred mountain. The scene shifted again. It seemed as though there were fragments missing from his memory. In the next moment, Jian Wushuang was lying amidst a field of corpses, the sacred mountain still standing in the background. He knelt atop a pile of bodies, his breath completely gone. At that moment, several figures with overwhelming auras brushed past him, heading toward the sacred mountain. Within the clouds halfway up the mountain, a crack slowly opened, followed by a blinding burst of light. In an instant, those figures fell from the top of the sacred mountain, and with a thunderous crash, the mountain itself began to collapse. A sense of hopeless void erupted from that place. And with that, the memory abruptly ended. Jian Wushuang's eyes instantly cleared, and everything that had just happened felt like a dream. He had silently absorbed the golden soul. Yet, the images in his mind refused to dissipate. Beyond the memory, what lingered most vividly was that one brilliant sword strike. In that single strike, he had gained many insights. It was a revelation that could assist him in his own swordsmanship. But now, he had no interest in training. He stood dazed in place for what felt like half a day. A mask, the prophet, the sacred mountain. A formidable opponent with overwhelming aura, Jian Wushuang murmured, momentarily unable to distinguish between reality and illusion. Took him a while to regain his composure. The mysterious figure wearing the mask was the prophet he had encountered in the star field of the gods. He clearly remembered that his beast god weapon had been forged by this prophet, but in the memory he had absorbed, he could not recall the prophet at all. The reason he couldn't recall the prophet in that memory was because he himself had appeared within it. Could it be that everything was real? Jian Wushuang's heart trembled. If that was his past life, he wouldn't have had the beast god weapon or the myriad tribulation sword. What exactly was it? He wasn't sure, but the only person he could think of was his teacher, Xianxia. It seemed to be the future, yet in reality, it was the past. Is this what teacher Xianxia meant by seeing the future? But how long will I need to train? He asked himself with a bitter smile, shaking his head. It had been a very long time since he last met with teacher Xianxia. After entering the Dian realm, teacher Xianxia had met him in the Qishan temple, gave him the heaven-gazing chessboard, and instructed him to comprehend the mysteries of the myriad paths through its pieces, ultimately choosing the path of endless transformations. At that time, he had only been a Dao Lord. But now, he wasn't even a Dao Lord anymore. Though all of this might have been a trial and test from teacher Xianxia, intended to help him overcome the divine tribulation. However, in the future memories, those formidable presences were existences he couldn't even begin to imagine. Thinking of reaching that level, he wondered how many more years of training it would take. With greater power comes greater responsibility, and though his powerful state of mind remained, he couldn't help but feel a sense of impatience. Perhaps it was because he had seen his future failure and desperately wanted to change it. Master Xianxia, I will work twice as hard until I can stand before you. Jian Wushuang's gaze became incredibly resolute at that moment, and his entire aura surged with determination. The next moment, the surroundings began to darken. His entire body was transported out, and the second lamp extinguished. As he emerged, he immediately noticed Immortal Zhou Chen, who was waiting quietly within the law of destruction. Just one glance was enough for him to realize that something seemed different about the other person. Who are you? Jian Wushuang's eyes narrowed, and the law of destruction instantly swept over Immortal Zhou Chen. If the other party made even the slightest suspicious move, Jian Wushuang could kill him in an instant. Because in Immortal Zhou Chen's eyes, he saw a trace of hatred. Immortal Zhou Chen, still within the law of destruction, saw Jian Wushuang's serious demeanor and said something that shocked Jian Wushuang. Uncle Master, please don't take action. Let me explain. Who are you calling Uncle Master? Jian Wushuang was taken aback. The changed Immortal Zhou Chen helplessly replied, You! Moments later, Jian Wushuang stroked his chin, furrowing his brow as he spoke. Your master is called Ghost Eye? That means he's my senior brother. Yes, that's correct. However, I've never met Master. I only received his inheritance. From his teachings, I learned that Uncle Master would come to the temple I had set up after countless years. Immortal Zhou Chen stood there honestly, not daring to hide anything. This left Jian Wushuang somewhat perplexed. From what the other person was saying, he suddenly had a senior brother named Ghost Eye, who was once very powerful but had fallen later on. He then passed his inheritance to the Lord of Divine Fire, who was now possessing Immortal Zhou Chen's spirit, and set up the Divine Fire Temple, waiting for Jian Wushuang to take over the inheritance? But who was their master? If he and Ghost Eye were senior brothers, then who was their master? Could it be Master Xianxia? Jian Wushuang's heart stirred. In the memories he absorbed, he saw a pair of eyes in a rift. Could those eyes belong to Ghost Eye? Although this seemed far-fetched, he was willing to believe it, because what was left for him here was the realm beast's body and that memory. I'll believe you for now. Jian Wushuang's voice carried authority as he asked, Tell me, what else did my senior brother leave behind? The Lord of Divine Fire took a deep breath and replied, Master left behind 3 lamps. Uncle Master has already passed through the first 2, but the 3rd lamp only requires me to confirm your identity, and then I can directly give the contents inside to Uncle Master. Oh! Jian Wushuang raised an eyebrow. He understood the implication. If someone truly extraordinary had extinguished the first 2 lamps, the remaining one would activate the Lord of Divine Fire to personally verify Jian Wushuang's identity. If it was indeed Uncle Master, then the 3rd lamp's contents would be handed over. If not, then it would mean that someone lucky had encountered an extraordinary inheritance. Of course, this was just Jian Wushuang's speculation. But he wasn't wrong. If an extraordinary inheritor had come to the Divine Fire Temple, the Lord of Divine Fire would have benefited even more. Much more than waiting here for Jian Wushuang. However, the contents of the 3rd lamp could not be given to the inheritor. They had to be handed to Jian Wushuang personally. Uncle Master, please take a look. Inside the 3rd lamp is a gray jar. Master said that as long as Uncle Master appeared, the gray jar should be given to Uncle Master, and once Uncle Master retrieves an item from within it, the task would be considered complete. The Lord of Divine Fire spoke with some excitement. This made Jian Wushuang chuckle slightly as he asked, And after it's completed? Well, I can't say right now. I can only tell you once Uncle Master succeeds. The Lord of Divine Fire smiled awkwardly. Jian Wushuang didn't mind this. He accepted the gray jar and, using his thought power, attempted to explore it, only to feel a powerful force pulling his body and soul into the jar. What's going on? The Lord of Divine Fire was stunned. He hadn't expected the gray jar to swallow Jian Wushuang, because his master hadn't mentioned anything like that. Jian Wushuang was also startled. initially thinking he had fallen into a trap. However, once he entered the gray jar, he dismissed that thought. Inside the gray jar, countless void particles gathered. These particles, or rather white dust, each resembled a universe. The space within the gray jar was vast, and when Jian Wushuang extended his thought power to cover the surrounding 1,000,000 miles, he only then discovered the boundary. Within this enormous area, it was filled with microscopic universes in the shape of dust particles. Each particle contained the power of a universe. This is truly a windfall, Jian Wushuang gasped. Under his thought power's coverage, he couldn't even calculate how much universal power this place contained. Such a vast amount of power couldn't even be fully absorbed after transcending a divine tribulation. It might even be possible to directly absorb enough power to reach the level of a universe master. The rewards from these 3 trials had been greater each time. First was the body of the realm beast, which needed no further explanation. Possessing this body was the cornerstone for his journey out of the starry sky. Then there was the memory fragment. It made him realize that stepping out of the starry sky was just the foundation. The first step to helping teacher Xianxia was to leave the starry sky. And now there was this gray jar. Although he didn't know what it was made from, the power inside was so immense that it could probably rival a fully evolved realm beast like Morosa. Once he transcended the divine tribulation, he could slowly absorb it. Wait a minute. Divine fire told me to take something out. But here, all around me, there are only these microscopic universes. What am I supposed to take out? He took a deep breath and exclaimed, "Could it be that I'm supposed to take out an entire universe?" The white dust here was abundant, even forming a thick layer of the cosmic sea on the ground. But every single speck of dust was a universe. If he were in his prime, taking one out wouldn't be a big deal. But right now, he was just at the peak of the grand perfection stage, a state considered transcendent but still just slightly beyond the general heavenly Tao. Although his strength had already reached a level beyond immortality, he couldn't possibly carry an entire universe out. Do I have to forcibly move it? He smiled bitterly. If that were the case, how much strength would he need? Relying on just the power of his physical body and the will of his soul, he felt almost hopeless. Even at the Emperor level's peak, it was nearly impossible to move a universe. Back in the original universe, when he had grown to the peak, facing the vastness of the original universe, he could at most destroy some high-level worlds or create some high-level worlds. At his most powerful, he had only been able to move a secret universe, which was only 1/10 the size of a universe. But back then, he was at the peak comparable to a tribulation-level being. And now, he was just at the peak of the grand perfection stage. Even with the body of a realm beast, he didn't dare say he could span several levels to move a universe out. Impossible! But that doesn't mean I won't succeed. After giving himself a pep talk, he reached out to touch the nearest microscopic universe. Jian Wushuang was delighted. The dust was very light, just like real dust, but it couldn't be destroyed. He immediately regained his confidence and, holding a speck of dust, flew toward the opening of the gray jar. As soon as he tried to leave, the microscopic universe emanated an aura more terrifying than his perfected universe. As it left the gray jar, matter and everything else came into being. As he began to leave, halfway out of the jar, he was suddenly pulled back inside. This time, it wasn't the attraction but the weight of the object that dragged him down. There was no doubt that it was the microscopic universe. As expected, it's not that simple. If it were, it would be strange. Teacher Xianxia always gives me tasks that seem impossible, but I always manage to accomplish them. Jian Wushuang's lips curled up. He increased the life level of his physical body by 5 million times, enduring the soul-crushing pain, and once again charged outward with the microscopic universe. Boom! Just as half of his body managed to escape, it was completely dragged back again. However, his greatest strength was his persistence. Each time he attempted to break free, he was dragged back over and over. During these attempts, he needed to increase his strength, continuously challenging his limits. He elevated the level of his physical body to millions of times its original strength. This was far from the upper limit of his physical body, but it had already surpassed the limit of his soul. Yet he gritted his teeth and persevered. In one of his closest attempts, his ankle nearly broke free, but he still failed. However, this failure only fueled his courage to keep trying. He also realized the importance of focusing his mind. This was practice for him to perfect his control over his physical body. It was a beneficial process for him. Through repeatedly lifting the universe, he gained the experience of controlling his physical body to its extreme limits in the face of failure. A strength of 15 million times the power of the physical body. This power is enough to rival the tribulation realm. Jian Wushuang adjusted his strength and once again lifted the microcosm of the universe. With a powerful thrust of his legs, he shot up like a divine sword, rushing towards the opening of the gray jar. Boom! The moment he burst out of the gray jar, an immense force swept over him once again. But this time he didn't fall. Instead, he used every last bit of his strength to fly out of the jar. Splash! He nearly collapsed onto the ground from exhaustion, but, remembering that his nephew was watching, he composed himself and sat cross-legged on the ground, speaking calmly. I have already retrieved one item. You may continue with your explanation. Uncle Master, you are indeed extraordinary. At the peak of the great perfection, you managed to extract an entire microcosm of the universe. It's truly unprecedented. The Lord of Divine Fire was visibly excited. He gazed at the floating microcosm with fiery eyes, swallowing hard before returning to the main topic. Back then, Master said that if you could retrieve an item, I was to give you this token. He mentioned that this token could open the 9-prison pagoda. With that, he handed over a simple ancient token. Jian Wushuang took it, maintaining a calm exterior, but inside, he was overjoyed. He had long suspected that the 9-prison pagoda was no ordinary treasure, and indeed it was extraordinary. Especially this token, which was very similar to the one that Master Xianxia had left him back then. However, that token was meant to be used in times of life-threatening danger, while this one was intended to unlock the 9-prison pagoda. Thinking of this, he stored the token in his mind with a thought, and simultaneously went to unlock the 9-prison pagoda. But the token only had the number 1 on it, corresponding to the first level. He could fully open the first level without any difficulty, but there was nothing inside, meaning there was no gain. He guessed that as he grew stronger, he would gradually unlock the higher levels. He put this matter to the back of his mind. Is there anything else besides this? Jian Wushuang asked tentatively. The Lord of Divine Fire reluctantly tore his gaze away from the microcosm, then looked at the stern expression and said, No, Master instructed that once you have the 9-prison pagoda, you can stand tall in all the heavens and have the potential to ascend to the heavens. Again, Jian Wushuang smiled bitterly in his heart. This presence had appeared countless times, and he was almost speechless. However, he still feigned a calm expression and said indifferently, I don't care about these things. He could see that the Master of Divine Fire cared deeply about that microcosmic universe. So he asked, Do you like this universe very much? I wouldn't dare. This belongs to my master uncle. I wouldn't dare to have selfish desires. The Master of Divine Fire hurriedly shook his head. Jian Wushuang waved his hand and said, This is our first meeting, and you keep calling me Master Uncle. You've also passed along everything that my senior brother entrusted to you. You've done well, so I'll bestow this universe upon you. Although the Master of Divine Fire had fallen, Jian Wushuang could tell that a remnant of his consciousness still existed. It wasn't a mere fragment, which suggested a chance for revival. Perhaps, when that senior brother ghost, I left this gray jar and asked him to retrieve something from it before handing the 9-prison token to him. It was his intention to give the Master of Divine Fire another opportunity. A speck of dust, even a perfect universe that transcended limits, was of no concern to him, for he had a jar full of them. However, this microcosmic universe could enable the Master of Divine Fire to be resurrected and become a universe master once again, reaching his peak swiftly. In the future, he could be a helpful ally, and as a fellow disciple from the same lineage, he was trustworthy and worth helping. I can see that you need this universe to be reborn. I believe, Senior Brother Ghost, I also left you many good things. Take this universe as well. Consider it my gift to you." Jian Wushuang waved his hand, and the floating universe drifted toward the Master of Divine Fire. This gesture left him overwhelmed with emotion. Ghost, I had indeed left him many treasures, but none could facilitate a quick revival. However, this microcosmic universe was different. Once his consciousness entered the microcosmic universe, starting with controlling the stars and gradually mastering a perfect universe, he could return to the level of a universe master of the seventh tribulation within 10 years. To restore his peak state, comparable to a universe god, would only take a few centuries. By then, combined with the treasures left by Ghost Eye, passing the divine tribulation and becoming a universe god would be a simple matter. Without this microcosmic universe, who knew when he would revive? Even if he did, he would have to start from scratch, wasting a lot of time and facing the risk of perishing prematurely. If that happened, he would have to begin again. The most critical aspect was that starting over meant that the opportunities he needed wouldn't be prepared in advance. Who knew when he would reach his peak again? Moreover, he couldn't rush it. Every foundation had to be built carefully, or he would have to tear it all down and start anew. Now, things were different. A perfect universe, and a microcosmic one at that, provided him with ample time and opportunities to be reborn and quickly return to his peak. Such good fortune was something he wouldn't have dared to dream of in the past. But now he could, and he dreamed big. In the future, he too had the hope of ascending to the heavens. Every cell in his body trembled with excitement. The Master of Divine Fire knelt down, bowing deeply, and said respectfully, "Master Uncle's kindness, Divine Fire will never forget. Should you ever need anything from me in the future, I will go through fire and water without hesitation. This I swear, with heaven and earth as my witness, the sun and moon as my testimony." One could tell from his speech that he had read many books in his mortal days. If it had been Xianxia, he would have simply said, "I'm with you too. All right, you can directly enter this microcosmic universe. You can also take the Divine Fire Palace with you," Jian Wushuang said with a calm wave of his hand. He had already taken the important things from the Divine Fire Palace. Initially, he had considered studying the Divine Eye's legacy, but the token from Senior Brother Ghost Eye contained the ultimate Divine Eye secret technique. It far surpassed the rumored sequence inheritance. The sequence inheritance was far too limited, only sufficient for someone at the level of a universe god to use. It might be useful for a universe master, but that was all. Burning a bit of divine power probably wasn't even as potent as his super-eternal transformation. In this aspect, Jian Wushuang had confidence. The Divine Eye secret technique required burning divine power, while his super-eternal transformation amplified divine power. Of course, he also had a burning secret technique, but it might be slightly inferior to the top-level Divine Eye secret technique. After dismissing the Master of Divine Fire, Jian Wushuang returned to the blood-red entrance, where Immortal Zhou Chen's spiritual form floated down. However, it had already fallen into slumber. The Master of Qishan Temple has returned. Now it is time for you, the true spirit of Qishan Temple, to return to your original state. Jian Wushuang pointed a finger, instantly restoring Immortal Zhou Chen's spiritual body to its peak. The power that erupted from that spiritual consciousness was comparable to that of a universe god. Unfortunately, in the presence of Jian Wushuang, who had reached the pinnacle of Great Realm King, that power from the universe god lost its luster. For the universe god could not move the universe, whereas Jian Wushuang, despite only being at the peak of Great Realm King, could move an entire universe. And he had moved it out of the gray jar. Immortal Zhou Chen regained consciousness and found his spiritual body had returned to its peak. But before he could rejoice, he noticed that Qishan Temple had vanished. Jian Wushuang, what have you done? Immortal Zhou Chen was on the verge of collapse. The last time Qishan Temple had almost collapsed, and now it had completely disappeared. Jian Wushuang couldn't be bothered to explain. He didn't know where the temple had gone, but it was certain that the temple no longer had anything to do with Immortal Zhou Chen. The only reason he kept Immortal Zhou Chen around was because there was still another Zhou Chen outside. He was curious to see what would happen when the two met. Would they devour each other or cooperate? Both were possible. Now, he just needed to wait for the right opportunity to go out. He had already gained transcendent power. Neither his strength nor his realm would be suppressed, and everything outside could no longer escape his detection. Xiangyang and Jiangshang were both present, and so was Chun Yuan. His soul had been well preserved. It seemed that Li Miao and Immortal Zhou had kept their word and had not killed Chun Yuan. His thought power encompassed the entire star field of the gods. Within it, two of the most powerful auras stood out. One was from that ancient demon, whose strength was recovering rapidly and had already reached the peak of divine soul. The other was the Ghost Emperor, though he could no longer be called the Ghost Emperor, as he had merged with Immortal Zhou. The true spirit's consciousness had fused with what appeared to be a perfect soul. What remained was the blood mist and blood crystals hidden within the blood-colored altar, the essence left behind after the ancient demon's fall. Although this essence was from the soul lineage, it could still condense into a flesh body with a life level 1,000 times stronger. That would be the body of a special life form, likely the greatest scheme Immortal Zhou had in the star field of the gods. Using the souls of mortals, he had refined the Ghost Emperor. And with the blood essence body within the blood-colored altar, he would eventually become a postnatal special life form, embarking on the path of cultivation. Everything he saw was transmitted to the forefront of his vision through the celestial curtain. What Jian Wushuang could see, the real Zhou could also see. Seeing his own avatar creating a perfect soul and realizing that the blood mist and blood crystals were just one step away from merging with the flesh body, his feelings were incredibly complex. Because the Qixin temple was gone, he had no place to return to. Perhaps the split consciousness from the beginning was correct. This avatar of yours has planned everything well. You're very close to success. Once you succeed, you'll become a special life form, with the potential to reach the immortal level in the future. But you will always remain just an immortal, and an immortal with no place to return to at that. Are you willing to accept that? Jian Wushuang stirred the pot, unafraid of causing more trouble. Immortal Zhou, furious, retorted, I don't need you to worry about it. You've destroyed the Qixin temple, so just wait for divine retribution. The master will not let you go. Looking at the other party, Jian Wushuang thought to himself, if he knew that the master of Qixin had knelt before him, he wondered what his reaction would be. Without further words, he scanned Li Miao with his thought power. The first deposed emperor of the Great Tang was currently nestled with a frail woman. That woman was none other than Consort Yi. Seeing her delicate and pitiable appearance, Jian Wushuang couldn't help but feel regretful. She had been killed by the one she loved the most, resurrected by the same person, and then killed again. What sin had she committed in her past life to encounter such a wretched fate? Watching everything from behind the scenes, one could truly see the reality of the human world. This was the most genuine scene. A living hell. The ancient demon had slaughtered all the mortals of the 7 southern nations and had already reached the eastern land. No one could stop him. But there was someone who dared to try. That person was not Emperor Li Miao, but the commander of the Xianxia guards, Wei Zhouxian. Outside the city of Mongshan, the ancient demon swung his 8 arms, shattering the canyon outside the city. Feeling the summons from beneath Mongshan City, the eyes on the ancient demon's chest burned with heat and greed. But before that, he intended to devour all life in the eastern land. The light emanating from his enormous eyes covered the entire Great Tang of the eastern land. Countless people watched this scene. Even the fierce battle within the city came to a halt. At this moment, only 4 people were left fighting Immortal Zhou. 2 of them were powerful beings from the upper realm, both at the peak of the divine power realm. The other 2 were arhats from Baoguang Temple. As for the others, they were severely injured and had lost the ability to fight. They all stood on the city wall, watching the ongoing battle. But now that the ancient demon had arrived, even they had stopped fighting. Zhou Chun! Xianxia was also panicking, attempting to persuade him, even if you become a special life form, with your potential, you'll never ascend to the immortal level. Why not assist me? I'll ask my master to descend and kill the ancient demon. giving all his flesh and blood to you. An upper realm cultivator? Do you think I'm a fool? If you had a way to summon a transcendent being, you could have done it already. Let your master come down and kill the ancient demon. That way you can also become a special life form. We wouldn't be in conflict. Immortal Jochun sneered. He had experienced 9 worlds, seen more people than they had meals, and would never be deceived by an upper realm cultivator. Even if it were possible to summon a transcendent being from the upper realm, why not just have the powerful being come down and kill the ancient demon directly? It was evident that there were concerns, as the ancient demon was an invaluable treasure no matter where it was found. Xianxia and Fu Qing descended to the lower realm precisely for this ancient demon. Unable to kill it while alive, they set their sights on its blood-colored altar. They, too, desired to elevate their life levels. Such an opportunity would not be easily handed over to others. Now, having fused his soul with the Ghost Emperor, his soul level had already increased 500-fold. Next, he would refine the ancient demon's essence blood and reshape his physical body, elevating his life level to 5,000 times. With such a supreme body, his strength would soar to the pinnacle of the Great Circle. At that point, he would be just a step away from becoming an immortal. When that time came, he would seize control of his original body, thereby gaining mastery over the Divine Fire Palace. From within the Divine Fire Palace, he would gradually transport treasures, sufficient for him to break through to immortality. Additionally, he sought the primary sequence of the Divine Eye Inheritance. From then on, he would ascend rapidly with a chance to become a great emperor. This was his ultimate plan, and now it was very close to being realized. The ancient demon was on its way, and soon everyone here would fall. Their essence blood, due to the Great Formation, would all be integrated into his refining technique. At that moment, the death formation began to transform into a blood-refining formation. The death energy in the sky gradually turned blood red. It was a blood mist drawn from the blood-colored altar. This formation was more than sufficient to refine the ancient demon. Therefore, he feared neither the ancient demon nor the cultivators within the city. Even if they had reached the pinnacle of the divine appearance realm, they were no match for him regardless of their strength. His soul level had already reached the primordial spirit realm. Once he fused with his physical body, he would reach the Great Circle's completion. The ancient demon outside, whose life level had recovered to 2,000 times, would also be suppressed under this great formation. To him, there was no threat in this world. Thus, he always looked down on Jinxian from the Baoguang Temple. If it weren't for the opponent's protective treasure, he would have slapped him to death long ago. Fine, very well. This immortal will withdraw now. Let's see how you fend off the ancient demon. Jinxian waved his hand, his face dark, and said, "Junior sister, let's go." With that, he transformed into a stream of light and fled the Mongshan County city. This infuriated the 2 Luohan, their faces turning crimson. Originally, they were only at the early stage of the divine appearance realm, but with the help of the old ancestor of the Tang dynasty, they could temporarily elevate to the pinnacle of the divine appearance realm, a level where they could easily shatter space and ascend. Yet now Jinxian had fled. This was not what they had agreed to. Back then, the old ancestor of the Tang dynasty promised them a chance to ascend, but they had to protect the eastern lands. Now, their power was nearly exhausted. If they wanted to fulfill their promise, they would surely die this time with no hope of ascending. If they chose to ascend, they would have to watch the eastern lands fall apart. For a moment, 2 conflicting thoughts swirled in their minds. Finally, they exchanged a glance, said nothing, and also transformed into streams of light, fleeing the Mongshan County city. There was no need to ask. It was clear that they had given up. They couldn't abandon the chance to ascend and perish with the Tang dynasty. Fortunately, they still had some attachment to the Tang dynasty, so they didn't flee immediately. They decided to wait and see. If things really got out of hand, they would shatter space and ascend directly. Even though space had become more solid now, their strength was still sufficient to break through and leave. But for Jinxian and Fu Qing, those powerful beings from the upper realm, it would take 100 times more strength to shatter space and escape. The key was that these two had descended to pursue the inheritance sequence and the ancient demon's essence blood. Transforming themselves into special life forms was something human cultivators dreamed of. It was said that the cultivators from the ancient domain were far more powerful than those from the outer spacetime. This wasn't about quantity but quality. This place was the tomb of the gods, and their blood carried traces of divine blood. Those special life forms that could be nurtured here were even more powerful. Their life levels were generally very high. Combined with the inheritance sequence of the divine I-secret technique, once they became acquired special life forms, both their comprehension and life levels would reach the pinnacle, leading them on the true path of becoming a great emperor.